The Quirk Archivist. Act 1, The Weight of Records. Chapter 1, Catalogued. The notebook was already on its fourth replacement binding by the time Izuku Midoriya turned 14. He kept them under his bed in a cedar box that his mother had given him when he was 7, the one she had originally intended for keepsakes. Over the years it had become something else entirely. 14 hand-stitched volumes, each one dense with his careful, cramped writing, documented every hero he had ever studied, every quirk he had ever observed, every structural weakness he had identified through patient analysis and the kind of focused attention that people tended to mistake for obsessiveness. His teachers called it a fixation. His mother called it a gift. Katsuki Bakugo, who had stopped speaking to him 3 years ago after an incident Izuku still did not fully understand, had called it something unprintable. Izuku called it preparation. He did not know, at 14, what he was preparing for. He understood only that the world was full of information, that most people moved through it without reading any of it, and that he was constitutionally incapable of doing the same. When he watched a hero on the news, he did not see the flash and spectacle that everyone else seemed to see. He saw load distribution. He saw response times. He saw the gap between a quirk's theoretical ceiling and its practical application, the inefficiencies that accumulated like sediment in even the finest hero's technique. He saw what they could do better, and he wrote it down, and then he filed it in the cedar box and moved on to the next one. His own quirk, which had manifested 11 months ago on a Tuesday morning when he was brushing his teeth, was not in any of those notebooks. He had tried to write about it once. The page remained blank. The manifestation had been quiet, which was unusual for a first activation event. Most quirks announced themselves with something dramatic, an explosion, a burst of ice, a sudden gravitational collapse that destroyed the kitchen table. Izuku had been standing at the sink with his toothbrush and a mind full of completely ordinary thoughts when he felt something open inside his chest like a drawer sliding out of a cabinet. Not painful. Not frightening. Just present, suddenly, in a way it had never been present before. He set down the toothbrush. He looked at his hands. He reached, without quite knowing why, toward the feeling, and it responded like a trained animal. It was patient. It was vast. It felt, most precisely, like the inside of a library that extended in every direction without walls. For 3 months, he told no one. He went to school. He came home. He did his homework and helped his mother with the dishes and stared at the ceiling of his room trying to understand what had happened to him. He experimented carefully and in private, the way he had always done everything, and what he found was this: when he came into direct contact with another person and chose to activate the drawer in his chest, he could feel their quirk the way you could feel the texture of a fabric through thin gloves. He could sense its edges, its architecture, the specific shape of the power it carried. And if he pulled it toward him, it came. He had discovered this by accident with the neighbor's dog, who had a mild peculiarity that let her sense water sources underground. The dog had not seemed distressed. She had simply sat down and looked at him with the patient tolerance of an animal that had seen everything, and when Izuku released the contact and stood up on shaking legs, he could feel something new inside the library. A small thing. A quiet thing. But entirely his. The dog went on with her life without apparent difficulty. Whether she missed the ability, he could not say. He had spent the next 4 months learning not to use it. His mother cried when he told her, which he had expected, but her tears were not the kind he had feared. Izuku Midoriya had spent years preparing herself for the possibility that her son was quirkless, had built elaborate architecture in her heart to hold that grief without letting it collapse onto him, and the sudden demolition of that architecture left her briefly without composure. She held his face in both hands and wept openly for approximately 90 seconds, and then she straightened up, wiped her eyes with the hem of her apron, and asked him very practical questions about what he had observed. His mother had always been more perceptive than people gave her credit for. They sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours with tea going cold between them, and Izuku laid out everything he knew. The mechanics of contact activation. The sensation of absorption. The fact that the absorbed quirk appeared to reside in him permanently, integrated into what he could only describe as a kind of internal archive. His mother listened without interruption, which was the most generous thing she could have done for him, and when he was finished she was quiet for a long time. "What happens to the other person?" she said finally. It was not quite a question. "They lose it," he said. "Permanently, as far as I can tell. I have not been able to find a way to reverse it." Another silence. Outside, rain had started against the window. "Does it hurt them?" "No. Or at least, it did not hurt the dog. I have not tested it on anyone else. I would not do that without consent." She looked at him for a long time with an expression he could not entirely read. It had something in it of relief and something in it of sorrow and something in it of a fierce, protective pride that he recognized because he had seen it before, directed always outward, at the world that had told her son he was nothing. "Then we will be very careful," she said, "about what you choose to do with this." He had never loved her more than in that moment. UA High School accepted him on the strength of his written entrance examination, which was the highest score recorded in the institution's history, and the practical assessment, which was complicated. The practical assessment for hero course candidates involved fighting robots. Izuku had stood at the edge of the assessment zone for 47 seconds calculating trajectories and structural stress points and the precise sequence of contact hand activation that would let him harvest the construction robot's rudimentary mechanical systems. He had decided against it. Not because he could not do it, but because he was acutely aware that the examiners were watching, and that a boy who neutralized machinery through unexplained physical contact would raise questions he was not yet prepared to answer. He had instead spent the assessment running, dodging, and collecting observational data. He had scored no points in the robot elimination category. He had scored 207 rescue points, the highest total in the assessment, and the committee had argued about it for 6 days before the principal settled the matter personally. Class 1A received him with the wariness that exceptional students always attract. Katsuki Bakugo, who was in the same class, received him with something that had calcified over the years from contempt into a strange, complex hostility that Izuku did not know what to do with. He set it aside. He was good at setting things aside. He chose not to use his quirk during hero training. He took hits. He learned to move. He studied combat with the focused intensity he brought to everything, and he found that without a combat quirk, without anything that could be pointed at an opponent and discharged, he was forced to become very good at everything else. Footwork. Reading intent. Finding the angle between a person's stance and their center of gravity that told you which way they would fall. His teachers noticed his analytical precision and attributed it to giftedness. His classmates noticed that he was impossible to surprise and attributed it to obsessiveness. He was, by the end of first year, one of the most dangerous students in the class, and no one fully understood why. Chapter 2, The Archive Opens. He absorbed his first human quirk at the age of 15, during the USJ incident, and it was entirely accidental. The villain called himself Kurogiri. He was a man built out of warp gates, out of folded space and darkness, and he had used that ability to scatter Class 1A across the USJ facility like cards thrown from a deck. Izuku had landed in the landslide zone and spent 12 minutes methodically making his way back toward the central plaza, assessing the situation through observation rather than action, marking the positions of the scattered villains by the sounds they made. Kurogiri had found him before he found the plaza. The warp gate opened directly in front of him, a wall of purple-black darkness, and Izuku had no time to think and no time to plan and no room to move in any direction except forward. He went through the gate with both hands outstretched because it was instinct and because he was falling, and his left hand found Kurogiri's physical form somewhere inside the darkness, the precise spot where the man's body was hidden within his own quirk, and the drawer in Izuku's chest slid open without his permission. He felt Kurogiri's warp ability rush into him like water through a broken dam. What came out the other side of the gate was not the same boy who had gone in. Kurogiri collapsed. He did not lose consciousness immediately, but he folded in on himself in a way that Izuku recognized, from his months of careful self-study, as the disorientation of sudden quirklessness. It was not painful. It was simply the absence of something that had been so thoroughly integrated into a person's identity that losing it created a kind of existential vertigo. Kurogiri sat down on the ground and put his hands in front of his face and looked at them as though he had never seen them before. Izuku stood 3 feet away with a warp quirk living in his archive and the weight of what he had done pressing down on him from all directions. He had not chosen this. That mattered, and also it did not matter at all. He knelt down in front of the villain. He said, very quietly, because there were other villains nearby and he did not want to draw attention, that he was sorry. That it had been accidental. That he did not know if it was reversible. The honest truth in all 3 sentences, delivered without inflection, and Kurogiri looked at him with eyes that had lost their glow and said nothing at all. Izuku found them 4 minutes later. He looked at the collapsed villain. He looked at Izuku. He said nothing, which was more alarming than anything he might have said. The incident report filed by UA described the villain's sudden loss of function as an unexplained quirk failure. Izuku read it 3 days later in the principal's office, sitting very still in a chair that was slightly too large for him, while Nezu watched him with the particular attention of someone who had already reached the correct conclusion and was simply waiting for the other person to confirm it. Your assessment examination score was exceptional, Nezu said, pouring tea with the unhurried movements of someone who had nowhere else to be. Your combat performance throughout the semester has been equally exceptional. And you have never once used a combat applicable ability in a training environment. No, sir. Would you like to tell me why? The tea was poured. Set down. The principal's small hands folded together on the desk. Because I was not certain of the implications, Izuku said. And because I am careful. The villain at the USJ. An accident. I lost my footing and activated on contact without intending to. And you told him you were sorry. Izuku said nothing. You told a villain who had just scattered your classmates across a hostile environment, who had come to UA specifically to cause harm, that you were sorry for what you had done to him. Nezu's voice was perfectly even. I found that detail in Aizawa's report. He included it without editorial comment, which is itself a kind of comment. I meant it, Izuku said. What happened to him was not what he deserved as a consequence of what he did that day. It was something else. Something more permanent. I did not choose to do it. And if you had chosen? Silence. I do not know, Izuku said finally. I have spent a great deal of time trying to answer that question. I have not reached a satisfactory conclusion. Nezu looked at him for a long time. Then he picked up his tea and drank, and the expression on his face was impossible to read, which was the most alarming thing Izuku had experienced in a morning full of alarming things. I am going to make you a very unusual offer, the principal said. And I want you to understand that it comes with no obligation. You may decline. You may take time to think. You may speak to your mother, which I strongly recommend regardless. But I want you to hear it. Izuku nodded. There are people who know what your quirk does. Not many. 3, including myself. Those 3 people have agreed to keep this knowledge strictly contained because we understand that a boy who can permanently absorb the quirks of everyone he touches is not a problem to be solved but a variable to be understood. Nezu set down his cup. I want to offer you the resources to understand it. A study program. Access to medical research. Privacy. And in return, I ask only one thing. What? That you remain honest with me about what you discover. It was, Izuku thought, the most reasonable thing anyone in authority had ever said to him. Yes, he said. I can do that. He told his mother everything that evening, sitting at the same kitchen table where they had sat when he was 14, the same cold tea between them and the same rain against the window as though the intervening year had never happened. She listened the way she always listened, without interruption, without visible fear, with all of her considerable attention devoted to making sure he could say everything he needed to say. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. What do you want, Izuku? He thought about it carefully. He looked at the table. He thought about the library inside his chest, which now contained the structural schema of a warp ability that he had never asked for, that lived in him like a borrowed book with no return date. He thought about Kurogiri's hands, held up in front of his face, the look of a person confronting the sudden incompleteness of themselves. I want to understand what I have, he said. And I want to make sure that I never use it carelessly again. His mother squeezed his hand and said nothing else, because she understood that sometimes the most important things did not require a response. Chapter 3, What the Commission Sees. The Hero Public Safety Commission discovered Izuku Midoriya's quirk on the first Thursday of his second year at UA, which was significantly later than they would have preferred and significantly earlier than he had hoped. He had been careful. He had been extraordinarily careful, with the methodical caution of someone who had understood from the beginning that the wrong people knowing the wrong thing at the wrong time could determine the entire shape of his future. He had never activated his quirk in public. He had never discussed it on any communication channel that could be monitored. He had kept his conversations with Nedzu in rooms that the principal assured him were not surveilled, and he had trusted that assurance because Nedzu was the only administrator he had ever met who seemed genuinely uninterested in exploiting him. The commission found out because of an informant he had not known to look for, a mid-level handler at UA who had been filing supplementary behavioral reports on exceptional students for 3 years and who had, during one of Izuku's unsupervised training sessions in a campus facility, observed something he could not explain and had reached an explanation anyway. The first sign was a meeting invitation, delivered through official channels with all the appropriate UA headings, requesting that Izuku attend an introductory consultation with commission representatives at a satellite office in Muzidafu. The phrasing was administrative. The tone was pleasant. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday, during his free time, which told him nothing good. He attended. He sat in a clean, modern room with people in expensive suits who offered him water and spoke to him in the careful cadences of people managing a resource they had not yet classified. They explained, very pleasantly, that the commission was aware of his situation and found it deeply interesting. That they had a program for students with unusual or powerful quirks, a support structure, a mentorship track. That they were very eager to discuss what Izuku's future in the hero industry might look like, given his considerable abilities. He listened to all of it. He thanked them for their time. He took the water they offered. He asked 3 questions, each one phrased to seem like enthusiastic interest while actually extracting structural information about the program they were describing, who administered it, what the reporting obligations were, what a graduate of the program was expected to do with their career. The answers were not reassuring. He took the train home and sat with his notebook on his lap without writing anything in it for the entire 40-minute journey. He spent the next 3 weeks doing something he had never done in a systematic way before. He researched the commission. Not the official version. Not the press releases and the public records and the approved history that described the Hero Public Safety Commission as the cornerstone of regulated heroism, the body that ensured the industry operated safely and ethically and in the interests of the public. He researched it the way he researched quirks, by looking at the gap between the theoretical ceiling and the practical application, by finding the inefficiencies that accumulated like sediment. What he found was not a surprise, exactly. It was more like confirmation of a suspicion he had been carrying for so long that its weight had become ordinary. Heroes died young. This was a known fact, so thoroughly integrated into the culture around heroism that it had lost any ability to shock. The average career length of a professional hero was 11 years. The average career length of a hero who ranked in the top 50 nationwide was 7 years. The Commission's internal records, which Izuku accessed through a combination of public disclosure filings and the warp quirk in his archive, which he had spent 6 months learning to use with surgical precision, suggested that this attrition rate was not an unfortunate byproduct of a dangerous profession. It was a design feature. Heroes who burned out were replaced by new heroes. New heroes did not negotiate contracts from positions of strength. New heroes accepted the terms they were given because the alternative was leaving a field they had devoted their entire identities to entering. The Commission collected a percentage of every hero agency's revenue, set the ranking criteria that determined public visibility and therefore income, and controlled the licensing process that determined who could legally practice heroism at all. They had, over decades, constructed a system of near-total economic dependency. And they were very interested in a boy who could permanently remove a person's quirk. Izuku stared at the ceiling of his room for a long time after that. He thought about Mirko, whom he had seen interviewed once on television, who had described her career as a gladiatorial sport she had entered knowing the terms and who had laughed about the scars on her arms with the specific honesty of someone who had made peace with something that should not require peace. He thought about MT Lady, who was 23 years old and had been hospitalized 7 times in 2 years of professional work. He thought about Ryukyu, whom he had researched extensively in his notebooks, whose dragon transformation placed enormous physical strain on her body and who had spoken, in a single offhand comment to a reporter, about the paperwork she filed after every mission that resulted in serious injury, the forms the commission required, the way the process made her feel like a machine reporting its own malfunction. He thought about what the commission representative had said, pleasantly, in that clean modern room. We have a program for students with unusual or powerful quirks. He thought about what that meant, for a boy whose quirk could permanently disarm anyone. He closed his notebook. He opened a new one. He began, on the first page, with a single heading. Options. He spoke to Nedzu the following Monday, in the room that was not surveilled, and laid out what he had found with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. The principal listened without interruption. At the end, there was a silence that lasted long enough to be notable. You are telling me, Nedzu said finally, that you intend to remove yourself from the commission's area of interest. I am telling you what I found. What I intend has not yet been decided. But you have hypotheses. Izuku looked at the wall. Yes. May I ask what they involve? Not yet, he said. I am still evaluating feasibility. Nedzu was quiet for another moment. Then, in a tone that carried no judgment and no particular emphasis, he said, I told you when we first spoke that the only thing I asked of you was honesty. I know. I want you to know that this offer remains open even if your plans take you somewhere I cannot follow. Izuku looked at him then, directly, with the full weight of his attention. Nedzu met it without flinching, which was one of the things Izuku had always respected about the principal. Thank you, he said. I will remember that. He left the meeting and walked across campus in the thin autumn light and tried to figure out if what he was feeling was certainty or something else. He was 16 years old. He had a library in his chest that contained a warp ability and the faint mechanical schema of a dog's water sense and the carefully archived knowledge of everything he had ever studied, and the world was presenting him with a choice that was not, when examined clearly, a choice at all. He had always known what kind of person he wanted to be. He had simply not known, until now, what that would cost. Chapter 4, The First Conversation. He found Ryukyu Sugiyama at the end of a 14-hour patrol shift on a Wednesday in November, sitting on the roof of a parking structure in Narahata eating cold convenience store oden from a paper cup and reading what appeared to be a strategy guide for a video game she seemed to be deeply skeptical of. Izuku had spent 8 days planning this encounter. He had studied her patrol routes, her dietary preferences insofar as they were publicly documented, her tendency to debrief in solitude after difficult shifts before returning to her agency for paperwork. He had chosen Wednesday because it was statistically the day she was most likely to be tired enough to be patient. He had chosen Narahata because it was outside her primary jurisdiction and therefore carried lower risk of interruption. He had not planned what to say, because he knew from experience that planning conversations did not work. You could only plan the conditions. He climbed the stairs to the roof and sat down 6 feet away from her and did not say anything at all. She looked at him. She looked back at her oden. She ate another piece of fish cake. If you are a reporter, she said, I will throw you off this building. I am not a reporter. If you are a fan, I am not a fan either. Not specifically. He paused. I admire your work. That is different. She looked at him again, more carefully this time. He was in civilian clothes, no costume, which he had chosen deliberately. A 16-year-old boy in civilian clothes on a rooftop was a person, not a category. You are a kid, she said. Yes. How did you know I would be here? Pattern analysis. You have a consistent post-patrol decompression routine that follows a predictable geographic logic. I am sorry for the intrusion. I will leave if you prefer. She stared at him for several seconds. Ryukyu Sugiyama had a face built for expressiveness and a habit of letting it work freely, and what moved across it now was a complicated mixture of irritation and curiosity and the specific wariness of someone who has learned to treat unexpected interest as a threat until proven otherwise. "What do you want?" she said. He had thought about this question more than any other. He had written answers and crossed them out. He had considered approaching indirectly and decided against it because indirection with someone of her temperament was an insult. "I want to have an honest conversation with you," he said. "About your career. About the industry. About some things I have found in my research that I think you should know. And I want you to understand that I am not going to ask you for anything as a result of that conversation. I am simply going to tell you the truth and let you decide what to do with it." The Odin cup was set down very carefully. "You are 16 years old," she said. "Yes. And you want to tell me the truth about my career. Among other things." She picked up the Odin cup again and ate another piece of fish cake and appeared to be thinking very hard about something. "You have 10 minutes, she said. "Talk." He talked for 40 minutes. She did not stop him. He had prepared to lay out the financial architecture first, the revenue percentages and the ranking criteria and the licensing structure, because he had found that analytical evidence landed differently with different people and that Rumi Usajiyama, who had built her career on the precise and unsentimental assessment of physical reality, would respond better to structure than to narrative. But what came out instead, when he started speaking, was something closer to the truth of what he had been carrying for the past 3 weeks. He told her what the injury rates looked like when you mapped them against rank. He told her what the average career length looked like when you broke it out by quirk type, and what happened to heroes who lost their capacity to fight before they had any meaningful financial independence. He told her what the Commission's supplementary reports said about projected hero attrition over the next decade, which was that it was expected to increase because new licensing criteria were being implemented that would push heroes into higher-risk situations at earlier career stages. He told her that he had been invited, very pleasantly, into a program that he had concluded was designed to put his ability into the Commission's inventory. He did not tell her what his ability was. Not yet. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished there was a silence during which she stared at the middle distance with an expression that contained more things than he could read. "Where are you getting this data?" she asked finally. "Some of it is public. The public data is more revealing than most people realize because no one reads the filings. The rest I accessed through unofficial channels. I am not going to specify which channels." "Unofficial channels," she repeated. "You are 16. I am aware." She looked at him for a long time. The November wind came in off the surrounding rooftops, cold and carrying the smell of the city. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "You said you do not want anything from me. So why?" This was the question he had prepared the least for, because it was the one that required the most honesty and the most exposure, and exposure was not something that came naturally to him. "Because I have been trying to figure out what I want to do," he said. "And every path I can see requires other people. I cannot ask other people to participate in something without first being honest with them about what that thing is." He stopped. "And because I think that what I found out is information you deserve to have, regardless of anything else. You have been working in this industry for 4 years. Some of what is being done to you is being done without your knowledge. That seems wrong." Rumi was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "What is your name?" "Midoriya Izuku." "Midoriya." She tested the name as though considering whether to store it. "What is this path you are trying to figure out? What does it require, that needs other people?" He looked at the city below them. The lights were coming on as the sky dimmed, thousands of small illuminations, the ordinary machinery of a world going about its business. "I need you to trust me enough to have a second conversation," he said. "That is all. Just a second conversation. And I will understand completely if the answer is no." Another silence. The strategy guide had been forgotten on the concrete beside her. "Same time next Wednesday," she said. "Bring something warm to drink." That Odin was terrible. He stood up. He bowed, precisely the appropriate depth for the occasion. He turned to go. "Midoriya." He looked back. "You said the data you found suggests they want to put your ability into their inventory." Her eyes were direct and absolutely level. What does your ability do? He held her gaze for a moment. Next Wednesday, he said. I will tell you everything. He went back down the stairs and through the parking structure and out into the night, and behind him on the rooftop Rumi Usajiyama sat with the cold wind and the forgotten Odin and the particular stillness of someone who has just heard something they cannot unknow. Chapter 5, Architecture of Trust. He brought green tea in a thermos. 2 cups. He arrived at the rooftop 8 minutes early and sat with his notebook open on his knee and did not write anything in it, because the discipline of writing required a stillness he did not currently have. She arrived 3 minutes before the hour, which told him she had also been early and had made herself wait. He did not comment on this. He poured the tea. She accepted her cup without acknowledgement, which he had come to understand, from his research, was her version of gratitude. You said you would tell me everything, she said. No greeting. He had expected this. Yes. So tell me. He did. He told her about the morning with the toothbrush, the drawer opening in his chest. He told her about the dog, the neighbor's collie who had sat and looked at him with patient tolerance while her water sense went somewhere else. He told her about the months of private experimentation, the growing understanding of what he carried and what it cost the people he took from. He told her about the USJ, about Kurogiri falling, about sitting in the principal's office while Nedzu poured tea with the unhurried movements of someone who had already worked it all out. He told her what the commission's invitation had told him they wanted. She held her tea with both hands and did not look at him while he spoke. She looked at the city instead, with the focused attention of someone doing several things at once inside their head. Permanent, she said when he stopped. You cannot give it back. Correct. I have spent 8 months researching this. I have found nothing to suggest reversal is possible. I cannot give back what I have taken, and what I have taken cannot come back on its own. And they want to use that. Not a question. They want to control it. Which is a different thing, but the difference does not improve the situation. She was quiet for a moment. The tea steamed between her hands. If you used it on me, she said, with the directness that was apparently simply how she operated, I would be quirkless. Yes. And you are what? 16? 17 next month. A 17-year-old boy who could take my quirk permanently, who has spent a year and a half carefully not doing that to anyone, is on a rooftop in Narahata telling me all of this. She finally looked at him. Why? Because I told you I would be honest, he said. And because I want to ask you something and the question is not something I can ask without the context. Ask. He breathed in. He breathed out. I have been thinking about what a different system might look like, he said. Not heroism as it currently exists. Something smaller. Something that is not connected to the Commission's infrastructure, not licensed, not ranked, not dependent on their approval. A place where people who have been used up by the industry could simply stop. He stopped himself. Started again. I have resources I have been building for 2 years. A location. Preliminary infrastructure. I have been very careful and very deliberate about all of it, because I understand that what I am describing sounds like running away and I want to be clear that it is not. It is a choice. A specific and considered choice to build something outside the system rather than work within it. Rumi was very still. And you are telling me this because I think you are tired, he said, as gently as he could. I have read every interview you have ever given. I have watched every available piece of public footage of your work. I have analyzed your injury reports, which are public record. I am not reading emotion into data that does not contain it. I am reading what is there. He held her gaze. And I am saying that if you ever wanted to stop, I could help you stop. Not take your quirk. I would never do that without clear consent, explicit and repeated and given without any pressure. But help you disappear from an industry that has been treating you like a consumable asset since the day you entered it. Help you find somewhere that is not any of this. The silence lasted a long time. Mirko's face was very hard to read when she chose to make it so. He had understood, from his research, that this was one of her primary defensive strategies, the ability to pull all expressiveness inward when she needed to think without being observed. Why me? She said finally. Why are you asking me this and not someone else? Because of the interview, he said. The one from 2 years ago, on the All Might retrospective special. The interviewer asked you what you wanted your legacy to be, and you were quiet for a long time, and then you said you hoped people remembered that you had been honest. Not that you had won. Not that you had been strong. That you had been honest. He paused. That told me something about you. Another silence. Longer this time. What if I say no? Then I thank you for the conversations, and I do not contact you again, and none of this goes anywhere except my own planning. I have other approaches. Other people I might speak to. I am not making your decision for you, Usagi-sama-san. I am offering you information and an option and waiting for you to tell me what to do with both. She looked at him for what felt like a very long time. Your tea is good, she said. Thank you. Bring it again next week. She stood up, rolling her shoulders with the ease of someone who had stopped feeling their own muscle fatigue years ago. I am not saying yes. I am saying I want to think about it. That is the most reasonable response possible, he said. Thank you for your time. She paused at the stairwell door. Midoriya. Her back was to him. Her voice was level, but something in it had shifted slightly, in a way he filed in his memory very carefully. You said you have been building something for 2 years. Yes. How does a 15-year-old build something like what you were describing? He considered the question. Carefully, he said. And with a great deal of help from a warp quirk. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Then she went down the stairs and was gone, and Izuku poured himself the last of the tea and sat with the city spread below him and allowed himself, very briefly, to feel the specific, fragile weight of something that was beginning to look like hope. Act 2, The Ground Beneath the World. Chapter 6, What the Notebooks Know. The notebook was already on its 4th replacement binding by the time Izuku Midoriya turned 14. He kept them under his bed in a cedar box that his mother had given him when he was 7, the one she had originally intended for keepsakes. Over the years it had become something else entirely. 14 hand-stitched volumes, each one dense with his careful, cramped writing, documented every hero he had ever studied, every quirk he had ever observed, every structural weakness he had identified through patient analysis and the kind of focused attention that people tended to mistake for obsessiveness. His teachers called it a fixation. His mother called it a gift. Katsuki Bakugo, who had stopped speaking to him 3 years ago after an incident Izuku still did not fully understand, had called it something unprintable. December arrived in Muzitafu the way it always did, with the kind of cold that settled into gaps and corners and made every outdoor surface feel deliberate, like the city itself had decided to become inhospitable. Izuku did not mind the cold. He had always found it easier to think when the air had weight to it, when the world gave you something to push back against. He was sitting at his desk at 11:30 on a Tuesday night with 4 notebooks open and a topographic map spread across the floor when his phone produced a single short vibration. Not a call. Not a message. The specific pattern he had assigned to the alert system he had been building for 6 months, the one connected to the sensors he had installed at the periphery of the location he had not yet told anyone about in complete detail. He looked at the alert. He looked back at the map. He drew a small circle on the map with a pencil and wrote a number inside it, then set the pencil down and leaned back in his chair and spent the next 4 minutes thinking about nothing except logistics. The location was a property in the mountains of Nagano Prefecture, 6 hours from Muzitafu by the most direct route and considerably longer by the route he would actually use when travel became necessary. He had found it through a combination of factors that would have seemed overcomplicated to anyone who did not understand that simplicity in preliminary planning was the leading cause of catastrophic failure in long-term operations. He had needed distance from the Commission's primary monitoring infrastructure, which was heavily concentrated along the coastal urban corridor. Proximity to reliable groundwater. Structural soundness in whatever buildings already existed. Legal title that could be transferred without drawing attention, which had required understanding the specific mechanisms of rural property law and the particular circumstances under which such transfers went unnoticed. The warp ability he carried had been central to the solution. He had spent 3 months learning to use it with the same methodical attention he brought to everything, mapping its range and its limitations, understanding that it required a clear mental image of the destination and a precise sense of the spatial relationship between origin and endpoint. It was not a skill that came quickly. He had miscalculated his first 17 attempts and arrived in places that were adjacent to but not identical with his intended destination, which had resulted in minor injuries and a great deal of additional spatial mapping work. By month 4 he was reliable. By month 6 he was precise. The property was 4.3 hectares of mountain land with a farmhouse that had been empty for 11 years, 2 outbuildings in varying states of repair, and a spring-fed water source that produced clean water year-round at a rate sufficient for a small household. He had spent 8 months and a carefully managed portion of his savings on it. He had told his mother, who had sat with the information for 3 days and then asked him very practical questions about load-bearing walls. He did not know yet exactly what it would become. He had hypotheses. He had structural plans. He had a list of necessary repairs and a second list of desirable improvements and a third list of things that would only become possible once the first 2 lists were substantially complete. What he knew, with the certainty of someone who had been thinking about a problem from multiple angles for a long time, was that he was building something that needed to be ready before he needed it, and that the margin between those 2 events was not something he could calculate in advance. He picked up the nearest notebook and found the page he had been looking for. Usajiyama Rumi. Age 22. Career length, 4 years, 2 months. Injury record, 9 documented hospitalizations. Current agency, independent contractor structure under commission oversight, which meant she had no employer to advocate for her but also no employer to constrain her, a trade-off she had chosen deliberately based on everything he had read. Quirk, rabbit, granting her physical attributes far beyond human norms in the areas of leg strength, speed, and reaction time, with secondary enhancements to bone density and pain threshold that had developed over years of use. Projected career continuation at current activity level. The actuarial models the Commission used internally suggested a functional ceiling of 3 to 4 additional years before the cumulative physical toll made high-level hero work unsustainable. He had not included this projection in their conversations. It was not information she did not have access to. It was simply not information he had wanted to use as leverage, and anything that moved someone toward a decision they had not reached on their own was leverage, however gently applied. He turned to the next tabbed section. Takayama Yu. Age 23. Career length, 2 years. MT Lady. A gigantification quirk of remarkable precision for its category, the ability to scale her body mass and height proportionally while maintaining full motor control, which was not universal among gigantification type abilities and represented a significant technical achievement that the hero press had never once commented on because they were much more interested in other aspects of her public presentation. Injury record was harder to establish because her agency's reporting was incomplete in ways that suggested deliberate suppression rather than clerical error. He had cross-referenced what was available with medical facility records accessible through the Warp Quirk and concluded that the actual injury frequency was approximately 3 times what was publicly documented. He had not approached Takayama yet. He was still deciding how. Tatsuma Ryuko. Age 27. Career length, 7 years. Ryukyu. Dragon Quirk, full-body transformation type with partial transformation capabilities, aerial mobility, enhanced physical attributes across all measurable categories. The most technically accomplished hero on his list in terms of pure power ceiling. Also the most professionally established, which meant the most to lose from any consideration of what he was building, and also possibly the most tired, in the specific way that people who had been excellent at something demanding for a long time became tired without quite admitting it to themselves. He closed the notebook. He looked at the map on the floor. 3 people. 3 entirely different situations, 3 different sets of what he had come to think of as leverage points, though he disliked the phrase. 3 people who had been working in a system that was using them and who may or may not have known it fully and who may or may not have wanted an exit and who were each, in their own specific way, exactly the kind of person who needed to reach their own conclusion without being pushed toward it. He turned off the desk lamp. He lay down on his bed without changing clothes. He stared at the ceiling in the dark and thought about the farmhouse in the mountains of Nagano and all the things that would need to happen before it was ready. He was 17 years old and he had never felt particularly young until right now, when the full weight of what he was attempting settled onto him in the dark, and he allowed himself, privately and without sharing it with anyone, to be briefly afraid. Then he breathed in and out, steadied himself the way he had been steadying himself his entire life, and went to sleep. He met with Rumi on the following Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that, and the Wednesday after that. 4 meetings in total before she said anything that suggested she was seriously considering his proposal, and in the meantime the meetings had become something he had not entirely anticipated, which was simply time spent in the company of another person who was honest. They talked about the industry, initially, because that was the ostensible subject of their meetings. They talked about the specific mechanics of commission oversight and the ways in which the ranking system created perverse incentives for hero agencies to pursue high-visibility situations over genuinely dangerous ones, because high-visibility situations generated the media coverage that drove rankings and rankings drove income. Rumi had opinions about this that were incisive and occasionally profane and frequently more accurate than anything he had written in his notebooks, because she was inside the system and could observe things he could only infer. But they also talked about other things. He told her about the notebooks, the 14 volumes in the cedar box, the years of analysis, and she had asked to read some of them with the direct curiosity of someone who did not see any reason to pretend she was not interested. He had brought the notebook that covered her career. She had read it in silence for approximately 25 minutes, sitting cross-legged on the cold roof with her scarf pulled up to her chin, and when she was done she had handed it back without comment. She had looked at the city for a while. Then she had said, very quietly, that it was strange to read yourself through someone else's eyes. He had said he understood. She had looked at him as though measuring whether that was true, and then apparently decided it was. The 4th Wednesday was the last Wednesday of November. He had brought a thermos of barley tea because she had mentioned once, offhandedly, that she preferred it to green tea in cold weather. She had not commented on this, but she had accepted the cup with both hands and held it longer than was strictly necessary. I want to see it, she said. He looked at her. The place. Whatever you are building. She looked at him directly. Before I decide anything, I want to see what it is. I am not making a decision based on a description. This was reasonable. He had anticipated it, though he had not known when it would come. I can arrange that, he said. When are you free? 2 weeks. I have a commission assessment next week that I cannot miss without consequences. Something moved briefly across her face, tightly controlled and quickly gone. The week after, I have 3 days before the next scheduled patrol cycle. 3 days is sufficient, he said. I will contact you with the details. She nodded. She looked back at the city. She drank her tea. Midoriya. He looked at her. Whatever happens. Whatever I decide. I want you to know that these conversations have been good. A pause, faintly uncomfortable with the admission in the way of someone who was very accustomed to expressing themselves physically and found verbal expression effortful. Good is the right word. He thought about what to say. He settled on the truth. For me as well, he said. Thank you for that. They finished their tea. The city went on below them, indifferent and luminous, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Izuku felt the particular satisfaction of something moving in the direction it needed to move. Chapter 7, The Shape of the Place. He took her to Nagano on a Thursday in December, through the warp gate, which meant they stepped out of a back alley in Muzidafu at 7 in the morning and arrived, 2 heartbeats and a brief sensation of spatial translation later, in the tree lane at the edge of the property. The morning was clear and very cold, the sky a pale winter blue with the sun still low enough to throw long shadows through the bare trees. Snow had fallen the previous night, a shallow covering that made every surface clean and precise. The farmhouse stood in a clearing below them, its old wooden walls weathered to a silver gray, the roof intact and recently patched with materials that did not quite match but did the job. Rumi stood very still for a moment after the gate closed behind them. She looked at the property below. She looked at the tree line. She looked at the sky. How far from the nearest road? She said. 800 meters. The access track is overgrown. It is passable by vehicle in dry conditions but not particularly obvious from the road, and the property is not visible from any public vantage point. Nearest neighbor? 2.0 kilometers to the north. An elderly couple. They grow persimmons. They have not been on this part of the mountain in at least 3 years, based on the state of the old boundary markers. She nodded once, which he had come to understand meant she was processing rather than approving or dismissing. They walked down through the snow, their footprints the first marks on the fresh white surface, and Izuku showed her the property the way he showed people everything, methodically and completely, without editorializing. The farmhouse first, the main room, which ran the full width of the building with a central hearth that had been cleaned and tested, the 2 side rooms that he had begun to convert into functional sleeping spaces, the kitchen at the rear with its cast iron range and the water line he had run from the spring. He had not tried to make it beautiful. He had tried to make it sound, and it was sound, in the specific way of very old buildings that had been built by people who expected them to last. Then the outbuildings. The larger one had been a barn and was now a workshop, or the beginning of one, with a workbench along one wall and shelves he had built from salvaged lumber along another. The smaller one he had not decided about yet. It had good bones and terrible ventilation, and he had left that decision open because decisions made before you understood all the variables were almost always wrong. Then the spring, because the spring was important. It came out of the hillside through a stone channel that predated the farmhouse by at least 50 years, clean and cold and steady, and he had tested it through 3 different filtration and safety analyses over the course of the year. It was good water. It was reliably good water. This was not a small thing. Rumi walked through all of it without saying much. She tested walls with the flat of her hand, the way someone does when they are assessing load, checked sight lines from windows, looked at the angles from the main room to the tree line with the professional attention of someone who had spent years thinking about approach and egress. He watched her do this and felt, again, the specific quality of her attention that he had noticed in the first meeting, the way she assessed a physical environment with the same completeness that he assessed a written one. They ended up outside, in the cleared space between the farmhouse and the larger outbuilding, where a simple wooden table and 2 old chairs had survived the winters under a deep enough eave to stay dry. He had brought supplies, because he had planned for this, a small camp stove, water from his own flask, the makings of very basic breakfast food. He set up the stove without asking permission. She sat down without being invited. They ate rice and miso and watched the winter light move through the trees, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all. "You built this," she said finally. It was not a question. Not originally. But I had been maintaining it and modifying it for 8 months, yes. Alone? Mostly. My mother has seen it twice. She helped with some of the interior work. He paused. And I brought in a contractor for the roof, because I am not qualified to assess structural roof work. I paid in cash, through a third party, and the contractor has no record of this specific address. She looked at him with an expression he was learning to read, the one that meant she was deciding whether to find his level of caution excessive or correct. "You are 17 years old," she said. "This is a thing you say when I tell you something that does not fit your model of what 17-year-olds do. Because it does not fit my model. My mother has said this is true for most of my life," he said. I have never entirely known what to do with it. Something crossed her face that might have been, briefly, amusement. They finished eating. She stood and walked the perimeter of the cleared space with her hands in her pockets, not looking at him but clearly still processing. He cleaned up after breakfast and waited, because she would say what she needed to say when she had finished working out how to say it. "It is not finished," she said. "No. There is a significant amount of work still required. The second side room needs new flooring. The workshop needs better climate management for winter. I want to add solar panels to reduce dependence on the grid, and a proper root cellar for food storage. None of this is urgent, but all of it matters in the medium term. Medium term meaning? Meaning I expect to need this to be functional within the next year, and fully comfortable within 2. She turned to face him. Her expression was the direct, unguarded one he had seen only a few times. "If I came here," she said. "What would that look like?" He had thought about this a great deal. He had thought about how to describe it in a way that was honest rather than appealing, which were not always the same thing. I do not have a complete answer, he said. What I know is what it would not look like. It would not look like an obligation. You would not be here because you owed me anything. You would not be responsible for anything you did not choose to be responsible for. You would not need to use your quirk in any capacity, ever again, unless you wanted to. He looked at the treeline. Beyond that, it would be whatever you made it. I have some practical needs, which I will be honest about, because this place requires maintenance and that is better done by more than one person. But nothing more than that. And the other people you mentioned. The other people you might speak to. I have not spoken to them yet. I do not know whether any of them will be interested. This is not a community with a design structure and assigned roles. It is a place. She was quiet for a while. You said, in the first meeting, that you had a warp quirk. She said it carefully, in the way of someone who has been thinking about something for weeks. That you are not going to take mine. That you would never do that without consent. Correct. I have spent 8 months researching this. I have found nothing to suggest reversal is possible. I cannot give back what I have taken, and what I have taken cannot come back on its own. And they want to use that. Not a question. They want to control it. Which is a different thing, but the difference does not improve the situation. She was quiet for a moment. The tea steamed between her hands. If you used it on me, she said, with the directness that was apparently simply how she operated, I would be quirkless. Yes. And you are what? 16? 17 next month. A 17-year-old boy who could take my quirk permanently, who has spent a year and a half carefully not doing that to anyone, is on a rooftop in Narahata telling me all of this. She finally looked at him. Why? Because I told you I would be honest, he said. And because I want to ask you something and the question is not something I can ask without the context. Ask. He breathed in. He breathed out. I have been thinking about what a different system might look like, he said. Not heroism as it currently exists. Something smaller. Something that is not connected to the Commission's infrastructure, not licensed, not ranked, not dependent on their approval. A place where people who have been used up by the industry could simply stop. He stopped himself. Started again. I have resources I have been building for 2 years. A location. Preliminary infrastructure. I have been very careful and very deliberate about all of it, because I understand that what I am describing sounds like running away and I want to be clear that it is not. It is a choice. A specific and considered choice to build something outside the system rather than work within it. Rumi was very still. And you are telling me this because I think you are tired, he said, as gently as he could. I have read every interview you have ever given. I have watched every available piece of public footage of your work. I have analyzed your injury reports, which are public record. I am not reading emotion into data that does not contain it. I am reading what is there. He held her gaze. And I am saying that if you ever wanted to stop, I could help you stop. Not take your quirk. I would never do that without clear consent, explicit and repeated and given without any pressure. But help you disappear from an industry that has been treating you like a consumable asset since the day you entered it. Help you find somewhere that is not any of this. The silence lasted a long time. Mirko's face was very hard to read when she chose to make it so. Why me? She said finally. Why are you asking me this and not someone else? Because of the interview, he said. The one from 2 years ago, on the All Might retrospective special. The interviewer asked you what you wanted your legacy to be, and you were quiet for a long time, and then you said you hoped people remembered that you had been honest. Not that you had one. Not that you had been strong. That you had been honest. He paused. That told me something about you. Another silence. Longer this time. What if I say no? Then I thank you for the conversations, and I do not contact you again. And none of this goes anywhere except my own planning. I have other approaches. Other people I might speak to. I am not making your decision for you, Yusei Giamasan. I am offering you information and an option and waiting for you to tell me what to do with both. She looked at him for what felt like a very long time. Your tea is good, she said. Thank you. Bring it again next week. She stood up, rolling her shoulders with the ease of someone who had stopped feeling their own muscle fatigue years ago. I am not saying yes. I am saying I want to think about it. That is the most reasonable response possible, he said. Thank you for your time. She paused at the stairwell door. Midoriya. Her back was to him. You said you have been building something for 2 years. Yes. How does a 15-year-old build something like what you were describing? He considered the question. Carefully, he said. And with a great deal of help from a warp quirk. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Then she went down the stairs and was gone, and Izuku poured himself the last of the tea and sat with the city spread below him and allowed himself, very briefly, to feel the specific, fragile weight of something that was beginning to look like hope. She told him, in the clearing before he brought her back, that she needed 4 months. She had ongoing cases and spring operations already scheduled and obligations she would not abandon midstream because that was not who she was. He said 4 months was completely acceptable and meant it. She said she was still not saying yes, only that she was seriously considering it, and he said he understood the difference, and she looked at him for a moment with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether he actually understood something or was simply claiming to, and apparently concluded that in this case it was genuine. She spent those 2 remaining hours helping him clear a section of the access path that had become blocked with fallen debris. She had not been asked to do this. She simply saw it needed doing and started doing it. He worked alongside her and said nothing about the fact that this was itself a kind of answer, and she said nothing about it either, and the path was considerably clearer when they were done. He thought about that on the train home, the way that Ryukyu Sugiyama communicated in action more readily than in words, and the fact that she had spent 4 months on a rooftop in Naruhata having the kind of conversations she apparently did not ordinarily have, and what that meant about the size of the thing she was carrying that she had not had anyone to say it to. He thought about his mother, who had listened to him for 17 years on a kitchen table with cold tea between them, and what it meant that he had been that for Rumi in some small way, even if the kitchen table was a parking structure roof and the cold tea was a thermos of barley. He thought, it matters to do this carefully. It matters to do it right. He opened his notebook and started planning the next conversation. Chapter 8, Empty Lady and the Map. Utakayama was harder to approach than Rumi had been, for a set of reasons that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the way she operated in public space. Rumi had a deliberate relationship with privacy. She understood its value and maintained it with the focused discipline of someone who had learned through experience that the absence of a boundary meant its contents were considered available. She had off-hours routines that were genuinely off-hours, spaces she moved through as herself rather than as Mirko, and those spaces were the ones Izuku had found after careful observation. Utakayama had not, at 23, fully developed the architecture of a private self. This was not a criticism. It was an observation, and it was one that the Commission had clearly also made, because her career had been built in part on a particular kind of visibility that required constant maintenance and left very little room for the person underneath. She was photographed constantly. Not only on duty, but off. She understood this was part of the commercial structure of her brand, which was the word used in the documents her agency filed, and she appeared to have accepted it as the cost of doing business. He had watched hours of footage, some of it professional, some of it incidental, and what he had found was this: in the moments before she became aware of a camera, in the quarter-second gap before the professional persona engaged, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He spent 3 weeks finding the right approach. He ruled out ambush, which had worked with Rumi only because the roof had been genuinely private and the circumstances had allowed for the kind of unhurried honesty a public location would have prevented. He ruled out formal contact through her agency because the agency was commission affiliated and anything that touched the agency's communication channels was potentially visible. What he found, eventually, was a community gym in Hosu that she used on mornings when she was not on shift, arriving at 6 and leaving around 8, that had a no-photography policy rigorously enforced by the front desk staff because the owner had converted the space from a members-only club and retained the culture. Izuku had visited it twice, as a civilian, and verified that the policy was genuine. He chose a Tuesday in early January, which the weather made already difficult and the early hour made more so. He arrived at 5:45. He set up on a piece of equipment near the water fountain with a reasonable sight line to the entrance. He brought a notebook, because sitting in a gym with a notebook was a specific kind of unremarkable. She came in at 6:04. She was in civilian workout clothes, her hair down rather than up, and she moved through the check-in process with the body language of someone who had done this enough times that it required no conscious attention. She went to the weights section. She put in earbuds. She began to work. He watched for 17 minutes before he moved. He watched because watching gave him information, and because going in without information was the single most reliable way to cause a failure he could not recover from. What he observed, she worked with a focused intensity that was slightly out of proportion with the specific exercises she was doing, as though the exercises were a container for something that needed somewhere to go. She checked her phone twice, briefly, and each time set it face down afterward with a movement that was just slightly too deliberate. She was here because she needed to be here, not because she enjoyed it today. He put down the notebook. He went to the water fountain, which was adjacent to the weights section. He filled his water bottle slowly. She was between sets. He said, without looking at her, keeping his voice low and level, "I am not going to ask for a photo or an autograph. I just want 3 minutes of your time on something that matters. If you say no, I leave immediately and we never speak again." The pause before she responded was exactly long enough for him to recognize that she had been approached enough times to have developed an evaluative process for this kind of thing, and that he was currently being processed. 2 minutes, she said. He turned to face her. She was looking at him with professional wariness, the public person guard she had built over 2 years of constant visibility, and he met it directly rather than trying to work around it. "My name is Midoriya Izuku. I am a UA second year. I have been doing research on the structural economics of the hero industry and I have found information that I believe is directly relevant to your situation. I am not selling anything and I am not writing anything. I am offering you access to this information because I think you deserve to have it, and I want nothing in return for that." Her expression had shifted slightly during this. Not open, not trusting, but fractionally less guarded. "Why?" she said. "Because someone knowing the truth about their own situation seems more important than whatever discomfort there is in having that conversation with a stranger." Another evaluative silence. "You said 2 minutes, she said. You have used 45 seconds. Start talking." He talked. He gave her the compressed version, the one he had worked out over the past 3 weeks specifically for this context, the injury suppression in her agency's records, what the actuarial models said about her projected career trajectory, the specific ways in which the commercial brand structure she was operating under transferred economic risk from the agency to her while concentrating the revenue benefits in the opposite direction. He was precise and he was fast and he chose every word with the care of someone who understood that he had exactly the time she had given him and not a second more. When he stopped, she was very still. The earbuds were out, he noticed. He did not know when she had taken them out. "That is a lot of very specific information," she said. "Yes. How do you have it?" "Some of it is public record, read carefully. The rest I obtained through methods I am not going to describe." She looked at him for a long moment. She picked up her water bottle, drank, set it down. She seemed to be deciding something. "Are you doing this for everyone?" "No. I have identified a small number of people in situations I think are particularly important. You are one of them. Why me specifically?" This was the question he had thought about most carefully. With Rumi the answer had been about the interview, about an observable moment of honesty, and with you it was something different. "Because your situation is accelerating," he said. "The suppressed injury records suggest the physical toll is compounding faster than the public picture shows. And because the commercial structure you are in has been very deliberately designed to make it difficult to leave, and I think you may not have been told that clearly when you entered it." He held her gaze. "You made decisions based on information you were not fully given. That seems worth addressing." She was quiet for a while. Outside, through the gym's high windows, the gray January light was just beginning to establish itself. "What are you doing with this information?" she said. You said you are not selling it and not writing it. So what? I am building something, he said. I would like, eventually, to tell you about it. But only if you want to hear it. This conversation stands on its own. You do not have to be interested in what I am building to be entitled to what I have just told you. She studied him with the focused attention that he had seen in the footage, the way she assessed a physical situation before engaging with it. UA second year. Midoriya Izuku. Yes. She took out her phone. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. Give me your contact information. I am not promising anything. I want to verify what you told me and then I want to ask you more questions. He gave her the contact information, the secure channel he had set up specifically for these conversations. She put her earbuds back in. She looked at him once more. I will be in touch, she said. It was neither warm nor hostile. It was the specific neutral of someone who was going to do what they said they were going to do. He nodded. He picked up his water bottle. He left the gym and walked out into the January cold and allowed himself approximately 30 seconds to feel the particular, jangling relief of a difficult thing having gone as well as difficult things could go. Then he put it away and started working through the next set of logistics in his head, because there was always a next set. Yu Takayama contacted him 11 days later, through the secure channel, at 2 in the morning, which told him something about the state she was in when she sent the message. The message was short. It said, I verified what you told me. I want to know about what you are building. He replied in the morning rather than immediately, because replying at 2 in the morning to a message sent at 2 in the morning would have communicated urgency in a way he did not want to communicate. He suggested meeting the following week. She replied within minutes, which was a different kind of information, and they settled on a coffee place in Nagoya that was equidistant enough from both their regular locations to require deliberate travel from either direction, which meant whoever was there had chosen to be there. She was already in the coffee shop when he arrived, which told him she had been there long enough to establish herself, which told him she had come early, which told him the 11 days since the gym had involved a great deal of thinking. She was in civilian clothes, a wool hat pulled down, nothing that flagged her. She had made an effort at inconspicuousness that was slightly imperfect, the way the efforts of very recognizable people usually were, but the coffee shop was quiet and the other patrons were minding their own business. He sat down. The drinks were already ordered, which turned out to be barley tea for him and black coffee for her, and the fact that she had ordered for him based on his apparent age and apparent sensibility said something about how much attention she had been paying. Tell me, she said. He told her. He gave her the full version this time, compressed into a single conversation because he could feel that she needed the full picture before she could respond to any part of it. He told her about his quirk, laid out precisely and without minimizing. He told her about the warp ability, its origin and its acquisition and how he had learned to use it. He told her about Nagano, about the farmhouse and the spring and the 4.3 hectares of mountain land. He told her about his mother, because his mother was part of this and the omission would have been dishonest. He told her that he had spoken to Rumi and that Rumi was considering, and that he had not told Rumi he was speaking to her because these conversations belonged to the people having them and not to each other. He told her about the commission's invitation, about the pleasantly worded meeting and what it had told him they wanted. She listened to all of it. She drank her coffee. She did not interrupt once. When he finished, the coffee shop had filled slightly and the light through the window had shifted with the mid-morning sun. You are 17, she said. Yes. I am aware that this is information people feel the need to reiterate. Something that was almost a smile moved across her face and was gone. The absorption ability, she said. You could use it on me. Yes. But you will not. Not without explicit and repeated consent given without pressure. No. Why repeated? Because consent given once, under any particular set of circumstances, does not remain valid indefinitely, especially for something irreversible. I would need to be certain, at the moment I acted, that the decision was current and genuine. Not the product of a bad week or temporary desperation. He looked at his tea. The things I take stay taken. I want to be very sure that what I am keeping is what the other person wanted to give. She was quiet for a long time. She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. What would it feel like, she said. For me. If that happened. Based on what I observed with Kurogiri, there is a brief disorientation. A sense of something absent where something was present. It passes within a few minutes. He paused. What comes after that I cannot observe. I can only tell you what the people I have read about who were born quirkless describe as their experience, and that is not the same thing. Losing something you have had is different from never having it. Different how? I do not know. That is an honest answer. I suspect it depends entirely on the person. She nodded, slowly. She looked out the window at the street. Can I tell you something, she said. Of course. I do not like my quirk. She said it quietly, with the specific precision of someone who has been carrying a sentence for a long time and has finally found the moment to set it down. I have never liked it. I entered hero work because I wanted to do something real, and the quirk I have is the one I was born with, and it is very visible and very dramatic, and the industry decided very quickly that this was what I was for. Not the work. The visibility. She stopped. Started again. I am very tired of being a billboard. He said nothing. He had learned that some things were not improved by a response. If I came to this place, she said. Nagano. Yes. What would you need from me? Nothing that you did not offer. He said this carefully. If you wanted to work alongside me on the property, I would be glad of the help. If you wanted to do something else entirely, I would not have a problem with that either. I am building infrastructure, not an agenda. She studied him. You keep saying things like that, she said. No obligations, nothing required, your own choice. And I keep waiting for the part where you tell me what you actually want. I want a life that I built, he said. I want other people around who also chose to be there. That is the complete inventory of what I want. He met her eyes. I do not need anything from you specifically that I could not also have without you. You are not a piece that is required for the picture to work. You are a person who has been offered information and an option and whose decision I will respect entirely, in whichever direction it goes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. I have a management contract, she said. It runs for 16 more months. Breaking it would cost me. I know. I read the contract structure. The exit clause is expensive but not prohibitive if the injury suppression becomes a disclosed issue, which it would if you filed a formal complaint about the data discrepancy. She looked at him. You are saying I could leverage the suppressed records to break the contract. I am saying that is one option. I am not recommending it. I am describing the landscape. What are the other options? Fulfilling the contract and leaving at its natural end, which is 16 months from now. Negotiating an early release based on changed circumstances. Or constructing a reason to leave the industry entirely that does not involve the contract at all. She was quiet. 16 months, she said. It is not short, he acknowledged. But it is not permanent. And you would wait. I am not waiting for you specifically. I am building something that will take time to build properly. And within that timeline, 16 months is not an obstacle. She picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, set it down again. I will think about it, she said. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. They sat in the coffee shop for another hour, and she asked him questions about the property, specific and technical ones that told him she was already imagining herself there, and he answered them all as completely as he could, and when they finally left and went their separate ways through the Nagoya streets, he felt the quiet, solid satisfaction of a conversation that had happened exactly as it needed to happen. What he did not expect, walking back to the station, was the particular weight of having said I do not need anything from you and meant it completely and felt, under the meaning, something else, something harder to name, something that had to do with the way she had looked at the ceiling as though looking for something written up there that would tell her what was right. He filed that feeling carefully in a part of the archive that had nothing to do with quirks and kept walking. Chapter 9, The Dragon and the Long View. Ryukyu was the most difficult. This was not because she was unfriendly or because access was impossible. It was because she was 27 years old and 7 years into her career and the kind of person who had built a thoughtful and deliberate relationship with her own choices, which meant any conversation he tried to have with her needed to be genuinely worthy of her attention rather than merely interesting. He spent 6 weeks thinking about it. He attended 2 public events where she was scheduled to speak, community outreach sessions for which her agency had public registration, and he sat in the back with his notebook and watched how she carried herself in an environment where she was nominally relaxed and observed what it cost her. He read her published interviews, all of them going back to her first year as a pro, and tracked the evolution of what she said and more importantly how she said it. What he found, read carefully, was a pattern of increasing precision and decreasing color. Her earliest interviews had a quality of genuine expressiveness that had compressed over the years into the careful language of someone who had learned that honesty was expensive and had rationed it accordingly. She still said honest things. She had not stopped being honest. But she said them in smaller amounts, with more insulation around them, and the gap between the insulation and the honest thing inside was, to someone paying the right kind of attention, visible. He wrote to her agency and requested a formal meeting, because formal was the correct register for her. The meeting took 3 weeks to schedule and happened in a conference room at the Ryukyu agency's offices in Osaka, which was a deliberate choice on her part, and he came in civilian clothes with his notebook and was shown to a room with a window that overlooked a street where the March rain was making ordinary patterns on the pavement. She came in 3 minutes after he was seated, which meant she had been watching the clock deliberately, and she sat down across the table with the kind of economy of movement that came from years of inhabiting a body that could expand to fill a building, a precision in the ordinary scale that was a byproduct of the extraordinary one. Midoriya-san, she said. Your meeting request described your purpose as research consultation. What kind of research? I want to be honest with you immediately, because I think that is the only approach worth taking with you and anything else would be a waste of both our time. He met her gaze and held it. I am doing research, and it is research that affects you directly. I have been compiling information about the structural economics of the hero industry, specifically about the Commission's management of top-ranked heroes, and I found things that I think you should know. I am not here as a journalist or a competitor or someone with an agenda that requires anything from you. I am here because the information belongs to you. She studied him across the table. Her expression was measured and entirely attentive. You are a UA student, she said. 2nd year, yes. How do you come to have information about commission economics that a currently practicing top 10 hero does not have? Because I have a quirk that gives me access to channels you do not have, and because I have been spending a very large amount of my time on this specific question for reasons I will explain if you want me to. Explain. He told her about the commission's meeting, about the pleasant room and the water and the program for students with unusual quirks, and what he had concluded about their intentions. He did not yet tell her what his quirk did, but the description of the commission's interest in it was enough to establish the context. She listened with the same quality of attention, uninterrupted and complete. And the research, she said when he paused. What did it find? He told her. He gave her the same structural picture he had given the others, calibrated for her specific career stage, which meant including the data about senior heroes, the way the Commission managed the gradual transition of high-ranking heroes from active combat roles into advisory and mentorship positions that were substantially less autonomous and substantially more supervised. He told her about the contract riders that became standard at the 5-year mark of Commission-affiliated careers, the ones described in the documentation as standard protective clauses and which actually functioned as very soft constraints on the hero's ability to make independent decisions about high-profile cases. He watched her face as he laid this out. It did not change dramatically. But there were small things, the slight increase in the stillness of her hands, the way her focus sharpened without visibly shifting, that told him she was hearing something she had suspected and was having the suspicion confirmed. The 5-year advisories, she said when he finished. I signed one 8 months ago. I know. Standard protective clause was the phrasing used. Yes. The specific provision I am referring to is Section 12, subsection C. It is written in the passive voice, which obscures the actor, but the functional effect is that certain categories of operational decision require consultation with a commission-designated liaison before implementation. She was quiet for a moment. Consultation, she said, in a tone that made clear she understood the distance between the word as written and the word as practiced. The liaison role carries informal veto authority in practice, yes. Another silence. Outside, the rain continued its patient work on the pavement. Why are you telling me this? She said. Not hostile. Genuinely asking. The same reason I told the others. Because you made decisions based on information you were not fully given, and the information belongs to you regardless of what you do with it. The others, she said. Who else have you spoken to? I am not going to tell you that. Those conversations belong to the people who had them. She considered this. That is a reasonable position, she said, and the acknowledgement, coming from her, had a weight that other people's acknowledgements usually lacked. Can I tell you something I have been thinking about, she said, after a pause. Please. I entered this field because I believed in it. I was 20 years old and I believed in the idea of heroes in the way that you believe in things when you are 20, which is completely and without much examination. She spoke carefully, weighing each sentence before releasing it. 7 years later I still believe in the idea. What I have lost faith in is the machinery. And I have been trying for some time to figure out what an honest person does when they believe in a thing but not in the system that claims to deliver it. Izuku said nothing. He let her finish. I do not know if the answer is what you appear to be building, she said. I do not know enough about what you are building to say. But I think you are asking a question that is worth asking. She looked at him directly. Tell me more about it, he told her. He told her all of it, more than he had told anyone except his mother, because she was asking from the right place and with the right quality of attention. He told her about the farmhouse and the spring and the solar panels he was planning and the root cellar he had not yet built. He told her about the warp ability and how he used it and what it meant for the logistics of a place that needed to be genuinely difficult to find. He told her about Kirojiri, the original accidental absorption, and the specific weight of that moment. He told her about his mother, sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea between them, asking him what he wanted, and what he had said. She listened to all of it in the attentive silence he had come to recognize as her primary mode of engagement. When he was done, she sat for a moment with her hands folded on the table. You said you would not use your absorption ability without consent, she said. Correct. And that you would need the consent to be current and repeated. Yes. Why are you telling me this before I have asked? Because I think it matters to the decision you are considering, and because I want every decision that involves me to be made with full information. He looked at her steadily. You have a powerful and physically demanding quirk. The question of what you would want to do with it is yours to answer. I am not going to assume the answer. She was quiet for a long time. A long, considered time, the kind of quiet that had weight rather than vacancy. I need to think, she said. Of course. And I would like to visit the property. Before any decision. I want to see what I would be considering. I will arrange it. Not immediately. I have obligations through the end of spring that I will not walk away from. These are commitments I made to my team, not to the commission, and they matter. I understand. I would not expect you to. She stood. She extended her hand. He shook it, and the handshake was firm and complete, the handshake of someone who had decided to take something seriously. Midoriya-san, she said. I want to ask you one more thing. Yes. How old are you? 17. Something moved across her face that was too layered to fully read. It contained, he thought, something that was almost admiration, and something that was nearly sorrow, and something that was simply the recognition of a fact that did not have an easy category. You are carrying a great deal, she said. I manage, he said. I imagine you do. She picked up her folder. I will be in touch. He left the Ryukyu agency's offices and walked out into the Osaka rain and stood for a moment on the wet pavement feeling the quiet, enormous weight of 3 conversations converging toward a single point, and he thought about the farmhouse in the mountains with its patched roof and its spring-fed water and all the empty rooms waiting to become something, and he thought about what his mother had said. Build it well. He would. Chapter 10, The Commission Moves. The second meeting with the Commission arrived with no warning, delivered through official UA channels in the form of a mandatory consultation request, and the word mandatory was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. It was April of his second year. The cherry blossoms had come and gone in their particular way, brief and total, and the city had returned to the ordinary palette of spring green and working gray. He had been expecting something like this for 4 months. He had spent those 4 months being very careful about every decision, every communication, every movement that touched the structures the Commission could observe, and he had also spent them building things, incrementally and quietly, that the Commission could not observe. The meeting was at the same satellite office, the same clean modern room. There were more people this time, 4 rather than 2, and the additional personnel were a specific kind of additional personnel, the kind that wore clothes designed to communicate capability rather than comfort. He sat down. He accepted the water. He waited. The senior representative this time was a woman named Ishida, who had the specific manner of someone who had conducted a large number of these meetings and had developed a standard approach that she deployed with professional efficiency. She thanked him for coming, which was not accurate since he had not had a meaningful choice. She described the Commission's ongoing interest in his development. She explained that the program she had mentioned previously had evolved into something more specific, more precisely tailored to his abilities, and that they would like to discuss it in detail. He listened to all of it. He drank his water. He maintained the expression of a student who was interested and somewhat overwhelmed by the attention, which was not entirely inaccurate in its underlying components if not in its assembled presentation. The program, she said, would involve a specialized placement, commission-managed rather than agency-based, with a support structure specifically designed for Quirks with significant impact potential. She paused. We want to make sure that your development is guided appropriately, given the scale of what you carry. Guided was the word. He noted it. What does commission-managed mean in practice? He said. It means a direct reporting relationship to commission oversight rather than a civilian agency. More resources, more support, more institutional protection. She smiled. It was a practiced smile. More than an independent agency could offer a student with your profile. And a reporting relationship, he said. Who manages the oversight structure? What decisions require consultation? A slight adjustment in her expression. Standard operational parameters would be determined collaboratively. Standard operational parameters for what? He said. For deployment of your abilities in approved scenarios. Deployment. He noted that word as well. I see, he said. He said it neutrally, without inflection, and he watched her interpret the neutrality as acceptance, which told him something about how she expected these conversations to go. They continued for another 40 minutes. He asked questions that were genuine questions, questions whose answers filled in the picture he was building, and she answered them with the carefully managed transparency of someone who was used to managing information without appearing to. By the time the meeting concluded, he had a substantially more complete understanding of what the Commission intended for him, and it was precisely as bad as he had expected. He thanked her for her time. He shook hands. He left. He took the train home and sat very still in his seat with his hands folded in his lap and thought about timelines. He had been working on a year-to-year timeline for the property to be ready. That timeline needed to compress. He called his mother from the train. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting him. It was the mandatory consultation, he said. I know. I received the UA notification that you had been called in. Her voice was even. She had been preparing for this too. How was it? Clarifying. He looked out the window at the passing city. They used the word deployment. They described a direct reporting relationship to commission oversight. They said decisions about the use of my abilities would require consultation. A brief silence. How long do we have? She said. This was why he loved her. Not how are you or are you all right, but the practical question, the one that actually mattered right now. I am not sure. They did not apply immediate pressure. They are still in the manage a theoset phase, which means they believe they have time. He paused. I think we have 6 months. Possibly 8. And the property needs 6 more weeks of serious work. I can do it. I will come next weekend, she said. The flooring in the second room. You said it needed replacing. Mom. I am useful with flooring, she said firmly. And I want to see it before it becomes what it is going to become. Please let me be there for some of it, Izuku. He closed his eyes for a moment. He breathed. Yes, he said. Of course. I would like that. Good. I will bring the proper tools. You always forget the right tools. He smiled at the train window. Outside, the city gave way to the edge of things, the margin where urban became suburban became rural, the world changing its register in the way it always did when you went far enough from the center. Mom. Yes. Thank you. For all of this. For all of it from the beginning. A pause. You have nothing to thank me for, she said. You are my son. This is what this means. He did not trust his voice to produce anything coherent in response to that, so he simply said her name once more, softly, and she understood, because she always understood, and they remained on the line in comfortable silence for the rest of the journey. Chapter 11, The Work of Building. May was a working month. He went to Nagano 6 times through the warp gate, sometimes for a single afternoon, sometimes for 3 days, and he did not try to think about the broader picture during those trips. He worked. He laid floor in the second side room, which turned out to involve more structural assessment of the subfloor than he had anticipated, and he borrowed his mother's expertise freely and gratefully. He built the root cellar, which took 11 days of weekends and evenings, digging into the hillside behind the main house at an angle that would keep the temperature stable year-round. He ran conduit for the solar installation, which he had sourced through channels that would not produce a traceable record, and he wired the system with a competence that surprised even himself, though he had been studying the specifications for 4 months. He was not alone the whole time. His mother came 3 weekends, as promised, and worked with a focused quiet practicality that reminded him where he had learned the habit from. She did not offer opinions about his choices unless he asked, and when she did offer them they were grounded and useful, and she spent her evenings sitting on the wooden chairs under the eave reading paperback novels with the contentment of someone who was happy to be somewhere. Rumi came once, in mid-May, unannounced except for a text message 20 minutes before she arrived telling him she was coming through the warp gate he had given her coordinates for. She spent 4 hours working alongside him on the solar conduit, because she had appeared at a moment when he was doing that, and she worked efficiently and in silence. And when they took a break and sat under the eave with water she asked him about the commission meeting and he told her what he had told his mother. She was quiet for a while. 6 months, she said. Possibly 8. I am trying not to cut it closer than that. My spring operations conclude at the end of May. I know. I have been tracking the publicly available information on the cases. She looked at him sideways. You track my cases. I track the publicly available information on ongoing operations that are relevant to my planning timeline. He paused. Which includes your cases, yes. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. What comes after the spring operations, he said, because she had introduced the subject. She looked at the mountain above the treeline. The late spring light was warm and very clear, the kind that made everything look like it was paying attention. I filed a form last week, she said. With my agency. Citing cumulative physical strain and requesting a review of my active status. He was very still. It is not a resignation. It is a formal review request, which is a mechanism that exists in the licensing structure precisely for this reason. The review process takes 60 to 90 days. And after the review, he said, the review determines whether I return to active duty, move to a reduced capacity role, or... She paused. Or choose not to continue. He did not say anything. She did not need him to say anything. I have been a professional hero for 4 years, she said. I have been hurt 9 times in ways that required a hospital. I have been hurt many more times in ways that I handled myself because the paperwork for minor injuries was more trouble than managing it quietly. She turned to look at him, directly, with all the focus of someone who had made a decision and was naming it out loud to make it real. I am 22 years old and I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is take stock of what hurts and decide whether it is bad enough to matter. I have been doing this so long that I do not remember it being different. He let the silence do what it needed to do. I want to come here, she said. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, arrived at through a process she had been conducting for 6 months, and the simplicity of it had a weight he could feel. Then I will have a room ready for you, he said. When you are ready. As much time as you need between filing and arriving. 3 months, she said. After the review process completes. I want to do it right. 3 months is fine. She nodded. She picked up her water. She looked at the solar panel framework he had been assembling and said, without transitioning, you have the mounting angle wrong. It needs to be steeper at this latitude to optimize winter collection. He looked at the mounting angle. He looked at his calculations. He reviewed them. You are correct, he said. Thank you. I know I am correct. But she was already standing, moving back toward the work, and whatever the moment had contained was closed over again with the specific neat efficiency that was simply how she did things. He followed her. They adjusted the mounting angle together, working in the easy collaborative silence that had developed over 6 months of careful conversation, and the late spring afternoon moved over the mountain and the solar panels caught the lowering light and the farmhouse stood solid and patient behind them, waiting. Takayama came to Nagano in the last week of May, which was earlier than he had expected given that her management contract ran for another 14 months. She came through the warp gate at noon on a Saturday and arrived with a single bag, a duffel that was clearly packed for several days rather than a visit. He did not ask about the contract. She would explain when she was ready. He showed her the property, which had changed significantly since his description in the Nagoya coffee shop. The root cellar was complete. The solar system was mounted and operational. The second room had new flooring and a simple bed and a window that looked into the tree line. The workshop had proper climate management now, a small wood stove that kept the space usable through cold months. She walked through all of it with her hands in her pockets and her expression in the focused, inward mode that he had come to recognize meant she was measuring something against an internal standard he could not see. When they had done the full circuit and were back at the table under the eave, she sat down and looked at the clearing for a while. I broke the contract, she said. He waited. I filed the complaint about the suppressed injury records. 2 weeks ago. The agency's legal department tried to invoke the exit penalty clause, but the complaint created a documentation issue that made the penalty unenforceable. She said this evenly, like someone reporting facts rather than someone describing an earthquake in their own life. I am no longer a commission-affiliated hero. Are you safe? He said. The first question. The only question. Yes. The complaint created enough noise that they are being careful. Commission-affiliated agencies do not want the record complication right now. She paused. I had a lawyer. A good one. She anticipated most of the moves. Good. I have no agency. No license, which expires when agency affiliation lapses. No income from hero work, which was the majority of my income. She said this with the specific evenness of someone who has already passed through the fear into something on the other side. I brought enough resources to cover my costs for several years if I am careful. After that. She shrugged slightly. I do not know yet. After that, he said carefully, we figure it out together. The property generates enough through the land itself and I have supplementary resources. Nobody here goes without. She looked at him. Something in her expression softened very slightly in a way he had not seen before. You keep saying things like that, she said. I keep meaning things like that, he said. That is why. She looked back at the clearing. The dappled spring light moved through the trees in the easy, unhurried way of light that had nowhere more important to be. It is a good place, she said. The same phrase Rumi had used, in the same tone, with the same quiet quality of someone recognizing something they had been looking for without knowing they were looking. I thought so, he said. I am glad you can see it. She stayed for 4 days. She helped with the final wiring in the root cellar, which it turned out she was competent at, and she spent a long time on the second day sitting alone in the room that was going to be hers, which he had understood enough to give her space for. In the evenings they cooked together and ate at the table under the eave as the spring nights came in soft and blue dark, and they talked about the work to be done on the property and about the things they had each left behind and about the particular quality of quiet that this place had, which was different from city silence and different from absence, which was a presence of its own. On the 4th day she went back to Muzutafu to collect the rest of her things. 3 weeks, she said, at the warp gate. Maybe 4. I will have the room properly settled by then, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was one he was still learning, the one underneath the one she usually wore. Thank you, she said. For the gym. For the coffee shop. For all of it. You did the work, he said. I just offered the information. She shook her head slightly, as though disagreeing with this in a way she did not have words for, and then she stepped through the gate and was gone, and Izuku stood in the clearing in the May morning and let himself feel, briefly and completely, the weight of everything that was being built here. Not just the root cellar and the solar panels and the second bedroom with its new flooring. Something else, something harder to name, the architecture of a life that had been chosen rather than assigned, taking shape around him in the patient way that true things take shape. He went back to work. Chapter 12, Ryukyu visits. Ryuko came to Nagano in July. He had sent her the gate coordinates in June, after her spring operations had concluded, with a message that said simply, the property is ready whenever you want to see it. No pressure, no timeline. She came on a Sunday, through the gate, in the early morning. She stood in the clearing for a while looking at the property with the particular attention of someone who had been thinking about a thing for a long time and was now seeing the actual thing. He showed her everything. She asked precise questions, the kind that told him she had been preparing for this visit by thinking carefully about what she needed to know. She asked about the water supply and whether it had been tested, and he showed her the analysis records. She asked about winter access and he told her about the access track and the ATV he had acquired for deep winter months when the track became difficult. She asked about the Commission's ability to locate this place and he explained the property transfer chain and the warp gate access model and the deliberate absence of any digital footprint connecting this location to any of the names involved. She listened to all of it with a focused seriousness that he had come to expect from her, and then she sat down at the table under the eave and looked at the mountain for a while. I have been thinking about what you said, she said. About making sure that consent is current. That it is not the product of a bad week. He waited. I have been having a very long bad year, she said. So I have been uncertain whether what I feel is genuine or circumstantial. That is a thoughtful distinction. It is a necessary one. She looked at him directly. Here is what I know. I know that I am tired in a way that sleep does not address. I know that the constraint I signed 8 months ago is more constraining in practice than it was on paper, and that the people administering it have a different understanding of my autonomy than I do. I know that when I imagine my life in 5 years, continuing on the current path, the image is dim. She paused. And I know that when I imagine this place, with the people who might be here, with the work that might be done here, the image is different. He said nothing. That is not a desperate answer, she said. It is an honest one. I have been checking it for 6 months and it has not changed. I believe you, he said. She looked at the mountain for another moment. I have 6 months left in the year, she said. Obligations I will not leave unfinished. At the end of that time I would like to come here. Your room will be ready, he said. She looked at him with the layered expression he had seen in Osaka, the admiration and the sorrow and the recognition. How do you do this, she said. How do you carry all of this and stay steady? He thought about the answer honestly. He thought about the notebook on the hillside and the parameters he had written out and his mother's hand over his on the kitchen table. I write things down, he said. I ask my mother questions. And I remind myself that steady is not the same as certain, and that it is all right not to be certain, as long as you are moving in the direction you actually believe in. She considered this. That is good advice, she said. I am stealing it from myself, he said. I invented it at 2 in the morning last month and I have been using it since. This time, unmistakably, she smiled. A brief and genuine thing. They sat together in the July morning with the mountain above them and the farmhouse behind them and the years of what had been built and what was still being built all around them, and for a while neither of them needed to say anything at all. He made tea. She accepted it with both hands, the way Rumi had in November on that first cold rooftop, and he thought about that without commenting on it, the way certain gestures recurred across different people when the circumstances were right, the way a person reached for warmth when warmth was offered and the reaching meant something, quiet and simple, that did not require a name. They talked for 3 hours after that. They talked about the property and the plans for the coming winter and the question of whether to plant anything in the cleared section east of the farmhouse, which had good sun exposure and looked like it had been a kitchen garden at some point in the building's history. They talked about what she was going to do about the 5-year advisory, which she had not yet decided, and he offered the relevant information without offering an opinion, because the opinion was hers to form. They talked about her team, the 3 pro heroes who worked under her agency's umbrella, and she spoke about them with a care that told him this was one of the genuine costs she was weighing, the people who would be affected by whatever she decided. I am not leaving them in a bad position, she said. Whatever I decide, I will make sure they are properly placed. I did not think you would do otherwise, he said. She looked at him. You have a very specific way of expressing confidence in people, she said. I try to only express confidence I actually have, he said. She was quiet for a moment, and the expression on her face was the layered one again, the one that contained more than it disclosed. 6 months, she said. I will be in contact. She stood. She looked at the farmhouse once more, the whole sweep of the property, with the long attentive look of someone committing something to memory. Then she stepped through the gate and was gone, and the clearing was quiet, and Izuku stood with his tea going cold in his hands and thought about 6 months and what they would hold. Chapter 13, What the Archive Holds. He took stock in late July, on a warm evening that had kept its heat past sunset, sitting on the hillside above the farmhouse with his notebook on his knee and the sounds of the mountain coming in from the trees. The archive, as he had come to think of it, the library in his chest, contained a partial canine water sense that he had never used and never intended to, but which existed as a quiet presence, faint and low. Hirojari's warp ability, which had become native to him over the 2 years since the USJ, integrated so thoroughly that using it felt as natural as walking. Nothing else. He had not absorbed anything since the USJ. Not because opportunities had not arisen. Not because he had not, in certain moments, felt the pull of the ability suggesting itself as a solution. But because he had made a decision, in the months after the USJ, that the use of the archive was not something he would approach without full deliberation, and that decision had held. He thought about what the commission wanted from him. He thought about what a boy who could permanently disarm anyone meant to an institution that managed power at a national scale. He thought about the word deployment and about the word managed and about the smiling careful way that the representative had described a direct reporting relationship as support. He thought about Rumi's 9 hospitalizations. About Yu's suppressed injury records. About the gap in Ryuko's interviews, the compression of honesty over 7 years. He thought about what the library inside him was for. He had asked himself this question many times. He had not reached a final answer because he was not certain there was one, only partial answers that were true in their contexts. The archive was his and he had not chosen to have it, and it was not going away. What he did with it was the only dimension he actually controlled. He opened the notebook to a fresh page. He wrote a heading. Parameters. Below that he wrote, carefully and slowly, as though the deliberateness of the writing mattered to the content, the archive is not a weapon. The archive is not a tool in the ordinary sense. The archive is a consequence of contact and proximity, and contact and proximity are things I can manage. I will not use this ability against any person, for any reason, without that person's explicit, current, and uncoerced consent. I will not allow the commission or any authority to reframe this as a service they are entitled to. I will not become what they want to make me. He looked at what he had written. Then he turned to the next page and wrote a second heading. What to build next. And he wrote for a long time, the evening settling into dark around him, the mountain going quiet with the sounds of itself, the farmhouse below with its lights on and its roof patched and its spring-fed water running steady, and when he finally closed the notebook and walked back down the hill, he felt the specific and difficult clarity of a person who has looked at something honestly and knows, now, which direction to move. He was sitting at his desk in Musudafu on a Thursday night in late July, writing in the latest notebook, when his phone produced the pattern he had assigned to the commission monitoring system. He looked at the alert. He considered what it told him. Then he set down his pen, opened his laptop, and began to look at what was happening. The commission had been moving with a quieter kind of urgency over the past 3 months, the kind that did not announce itself in obvious ways but accumulated in the secondary signals he had learned to read. More frequent check-ins through UA channels. A new liaison assigned to his academic track, a person he had not previously encountered who had the specific professional profile of someone placed for monitoring rather than for support. An increase in the frequency of incident reports filed on cases tangentially connected to his class's training exercises. The alert tonight was different. It was not a pattern accumulation. It was specific, a flagging in the Commission's internal communication system that had reached a threshold he had defined 3 months ago, a threshold he had hoped would not be triggered for several more months. They had made a decision. He did not yet know the content of the decision, but the structure of the communication pattern, the way the flags had landed, told him that someone had moved from the manage a theoset phase to something more active. He closed the laptop. He opened a different notebook. He began writing quickly, the compressed notation he used for operational planning, moving through the checklist he had been building for 4 months. Property ready. Check. Solar operational. Check. Water system winter capable. Check. Second and third bedrooms furnished. Check. Root cellar stocked for 3 months. Check. Warp gate coordinates distributed to 3 people. Check. His own exit from UA, the specific and considered method he had been planning, the one that was honest rather than evasive and that would satisfy certain obligations to certain people while dissolving others cleanly. Partially complete. Needed 6 more weeks. He looked at the timeline. Then he looked at the alert again. 6 weeks was the answer only if the Commission moved at the pace he had predicted. If they were moving faster, the timeline compressed, and certain things that he had wanted to do carefully would need to be done at a different pace. He sat for a long time. He thought about everything he had built and everything he had not yet built and the people who were coming and the work that remained. He thought about his mother, who would need to know. He thought about Rumi, whose review process was currently moving through its 2nd month. He thought about you, somewhere in the process of disentangling her life from the city. He thought about Ryukyu and her 6 months and the team she was carefully arranging safe passage for before she allowed herself to make her own choice. He thought about what it meant to have made a decision, really made one, and to be at the part where the decision was no longer hypothetical. Then he picked up his phone. He sent 3 messages, one to his mother, one through the secure channel to Rumi, one through the secure channel to you. Each message said the same thing, in different words calibrated for the person receiving it. Things are moving. Stay in contact. We are ready. He set down the phone. He looked at the notebook with its lists and its arrows and its careful architecture of contingency. The Commission had made a decision. He had made his 3 years ago, on a Tuesday morning at the bathroom sink, and everything since had been preparation. The preparation was done. The last thing he did before he went to sleep was walk to the window of his room in Muzitafu and look at the city below, its ordinary lights and its working hour quiet, the streets that had been his streets for as long as he could remember. The cedar box was under his bed. The notebooks were full. The farmhouse in the mountains had its lights on and its spring running and its rooms waiting. He had been a boy with a notebook full of dreams about heroes, once. He had been, before that, a boy who had no quirk and who had been told in various explicit and implicit ways that the absence of a quirk was the absence of a future. He had been, in between those things, a boy who had discovered something in himself that the world immediately wanted to use, and who had spent 3 years becoming the kind of person who understood what use meant and had decided to mean something different by it. He was 17 years old. He did not feel young. He did not feel old. He felt, most precisely, like someone who was standing at the beginning of the thing they had been building toward, with everything they needed and a reasonable idea of what came next and the people they had chosen and who had chosen them, each in their own time and by their own reasoning, coming. He looked at the city for a long time. Then he turned away from the window and began to pack. Act 3, The Life That Stays. Chapter 14, The Letter. He wrote 3 drafts of the letter before he arrived at the one he would actually send. The first draft was too explanatory. He had filled 4 pages with the reasoning behind his decision, the structural data about the Commission, the actuarial models and the injury suppression and the contract writers, all of it laid out with the thoroughness he brought to everything, and when he read it back he understood that he was writing to himself rather than to the people who would receive it. He crossed it out and started again. The second draft was too brief. He had tried to correct for the overcorrection and produced something that said the necessary things in the minimum number of words, which was technically accurate and would leave everyone who read it feeling as though they had been handed a form letter. He crossed that out too. The third draft was what it needed to be, specific, honest, neither long nor short, calibrated to the people it was written for. He wrote it by hand on good paper, because some things deserved that, and when he was finished he folded it carefully and addressed it and set it on his desk and looked at it for a long time. The letter was addressed to Aizawa Shoyuta. Not to the school administration, not to the principal's office, though he had also written to Nedzu separately through a channel that Nedzu had himself established for exactly this kind of communication. The letter to Aizawa was different because Aizawa was different, because the man had included without editorial comment the fact that a 16-year-old boy had knelt down in front of a fallen villain and said he was sorry, because that kind of noticing deserved a different kind of address. He told Aizawa what he was doing. Not the full architecture, not the names or the location or the specific people who had chosen to come with him, but the shape of the decision and the reasoning behind it and what he understood it would cost. He told Aizawa that he was grateful for what Class 1A had given him, which was mostly the experience of being around other people who cared about something enough to work toward it, and that he was sorry for the disruption his departure would cause to the academic and administrative structures that would have to account for it. He told Aizawa that he was not in danger and was not making this decision in distress, and that if there was ever a time when Aizawa needed to reach him, the channel to Nedzu would remain open and Nedzu would know how to find him. He told him one more thing, at the end, which was the truest thing in the letter and the hardest to write. He wrote, "I know that you are going to think I am wrong about this. You are going to think the correct answer is to stay inside the system and change it from within, and I want you to know that I have thought about that answer for a long time and I do not disagree that it is a valid path. I simply do not think it is my path, and the difference matters." He signed it. He said it with the other letter. He sat for a moment in the room where he had lived for 17 years, the desk and the cedar box and the notebooks and the posters that had been on the walls since he was old enough to put things on walls, the accumulated material evidence of a life that had been building toward this moment without knowing it. He stood up. He began to move through the checklist that was always the last thing before a significant transition: what to take, what to leave, what to send ahead, what could be released entirely. The cedar box came with him. Everything else was a Kasibi case decision. His mother was in the kitchen when he came downstairs. She had made breakfast, which was not unusual, but she had also packed a bag of her own, which told him she had understood something he had not yet said out loud. He looked at the bag. He looked at her. "I am not asking," she said. "I am coming for the first month. After that we will see." He thought about arguing with this. He thought about the arguments he had available, which were primarily about her life here in Musudafu, her job, her friends, the routine that had sustained her through his entire childhood. He thought about those arguments and then he thought about his mother, who had sat at the kitchen table and listened to him for 17 years and who had come to Nagano 3 times with the right tools and who had never once suggested that what he was doing was wrong. "Okay," he said. She set his breakfast on the table. She sat down across from him the way she had 1,000 times. Outside the window the August morning was already warm, the kind of warm that promised a long day. "Eat first," she said. "Then we go." He ate. The food was very good, because his mother cooked with attention, and he ate all of it, and when he was done he helped her wash up and they moved through the apartment together collecting the last things with the easy coordination of 2 people who had been sharing a space for a long time and knew each other's rhythms without having to think about them. He left the letters on the table by the door, addressed and ready to be collected. He did not mail them personally. He had arranged for them to arrive through a specific channel that would deliver them intact to the correct people on the day after his departure, which was the right timing, not so far ahead that it would trigger an immediate response, not so close that it would feel like an afterthought. He picked up his bag. His mother picked up hers. He opened the warp gate in the hallway, because the hallway was where he had decided to open it, in the apartment he had lived in since he was 4 years old. And the gate was a door-shaped opening in the air through which the mountain morning in Nagano was briefly, impossibly visible. His mother looked at it for a moment. Then she walked through without hesitation, the way she did everything that mattered. He followed. The gate closed behind them. The apartment was empty. Outside its windows the city went on as it always had, entirely indifferent to the small revolution that had just quietly left it. Chapter 15, First Morning. The mountain was doing what mountains did in August, which was being abundant in a way that felt slightly theatrical if you had been living in a city and slightly obvious if you had been paying attention to the world all along. The tree line was deep green and full. The cleared space around the farmhouse had come back into the grasses and low wildflowers that Izuku had been managing rather than eliminating, because a property that looked used and lived in was less conspicuous than a property that looked maintained, and also because he had found, over the months of working here, that he preferred the wildflowers to the alternative. Rumi was already there. She had arrived 2 days earlier, after the review process had concluded and she had filed the paperwork that was the formal end of her active hero status. She had come through the gate with a pack on her back and a box of books and an expression of someone who had finished a very long argument with themselves and arrived at the conclusion and was not going to relitigate it. She had put the books on the shelf in her room. She had gone for a 3-hour run in the mountain forest, which he had expected, and come back and eaten a very large amount of food, which he had also expected, and then she had gone to sleep for 11 hours, which he had not quite anticipated but understood completely. She was sitting at the outdoor table when he and his mother came through the gate, drinking tea and watching the tree line with the particular quality of attention that was, he had come to understand, simply her resting state. She looked over when the gate opened. She looked at his mother. His mother looked at her. There was a brief moment in which two people who had been important to the same person, each in their own way, assessed each other across a clearing. "You are Midoriya-san," Rumi said. "And you are Usagiyama-san," his mother said. "Izuku has spoken very well of you. He has spoken very well of you also." A pause that had something almost warm in it. "The flooring in the second room is excellent work." His mother's expression shifted into something that was unmistakably pleased. She set down her bag and walked over to the table and sat down with the ease of someone accepting a seat she had been offered, and by the time Izuku had carried both bags inside and come back out, they were already talking about the solar panel mounting angle and whether the array needed to be extended before winter. He stood in the doorway of the farmhouse for a moment and looked at them and felt something that was not quite any of the feelings he had words for but that contained most of them. Then he went to make more tea, because there were 3 people now and the pot he had been using only made enough for 2. "You arrived 4 days later." She came through the gate mid-afternoon with 2 bags and a crate of kitchen equipment, because it turned out that Takayama, who had been presented to the public for 2 years as a commercial product assembled from her most visible attributes, had a serious and long-standing interest in cooking that she had developed in private because it did not fit the image her agency had constructed and which she had therefore never discussed with anyone. He had not known this. She had not told him. The crate was the first indication. She set it down in the kitchen and looked at the cast iron range and the existing equipment with the evaluative expression of someone who was about to reorganize something significant. "Is this all you have been cooking with?" she said. "It is functional," he said. "It is barely functional." She opened 2 of the cabinet doors. She looked at what was in them. Her expression became the one she wore when she was being patient about something that tested her patience. "I am going to need to make a list. Of course. A significant list. I expected nothing less." She looked at him sideways. Something that was becoming a familiar kind of amusement moved across her face. "You are not bothered by this," she said. "You have arrived here and immediately found something to do that you care about," he said. "I am entirely unbothered." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he was still learning, the layered one that held more than it showed. Then she turned back to the kitchen and began moving things with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided this was her space now and was making it right. He went back outside. His mother, who had met you at the gate, was showing her the root cellar with the enthusiasm of someone proud of a thing they helped build. Rumi was on the roof of the workshop, where she had been for the past 2 days doing a structural assessment she had decided was necessary and conducting with characteristic thoroughness. The mountain stood behind all of it, as mountains do, entirely patient. He sat down at the outdoor table with his notebook and began writing. the August afternoon moved around him. From inside the farmhouse came the sounds of a kitchen being reorganized by someone who meant it. From the workshop roof came the sounds of Rumi's efficient movement across the boards and her occasional quiet commentary to herself about structural conditions. He wrote, August 8th. All present except Ryuko, who is 6 months out. The property is operational. The solar system is producing adequately for current population. Root cellar is stocked. The water is good. There are 4 people here who chose to be here. He read that last sentence back. He wrote it again, because it deserved to be written twice. There are 4 people here who chose to be here. The first week was the week of finding out how people actually occupied a shared space, which was different from knowing anything about those people in advance, because people as known quantities and people as present physical realities were always slightly different in ways that required adjustment. What he found, Rumi woke before dawn and ran for 2 hours before anyone else was up, and came back radiating the specific satisfied energy of someone who had discharged something that needed discharging, and then she was calm and available and genuinely pleasant company for the rest of the day. She had no capacity for small talk and no interest in developing it, which was fine because small talk was not really a feature of how any of them communicated, but she had a great deal of capacity for working alongside people in companionable silence, which turned out to be more valuable in the daily texture of a shared life. What he found, you cooked in the way that seriously interested people cook, which was with focus and commitment and the mild ferocity of someone who does not want to be interrupted while they are doing the thing they are doing, and the food she produced was substantially better than anything anyone had been eating. She had made a list on her second day and he had sourced everything on it through the supply channels he had been developing, and after that the kitchen had a different quality to it, a used and purposeful quality that it had not had before. She also, he observed, tended to cook more than the current number of people required, which he interpreted as an expression of an abundance instinct that had probably been suppressed for years while she was managing her public image and calorie intake. What he found about his mother, she was happier here than he had seen her in years. He did not know entirely what to do with this, because it was information that had complex implications for her life in Muzitafu and for what the first month might become, and he did not want to assume. But she moved through the farmhouse and the cleared space and the mountain morning with the ease of someone who had come home rather than someone who had come visiting, and the conversations she had with Rumi and with you were the conversations of someone who had found people she was genuinely interested in. And when he caught her on the second evening sitting under the eave in the late light reading her paperback novel with an expression of complete contentment, he turned away before she could see him seeing it. What he found about himself, he was, for the first time in a long time, simply present. Not planning 3 moves ahead, not monitoring 17 channels of secondary information, not running the continuous background process of trying to understand everything that was happening so that he could position himself correctly relative to it. The monitoring systems he had installed were doing their work without his constant attention. The property was running. The people were here. There was work to do and he did it, and when it was done he ate food that was better than anything he had eaten in months and sat with people he had chosen and who had chosen to be there, and the mountain was enormous and patient around all of it, and the sky at night was not the city sky he had grown up under but a different sky, wider and less managed, full of stars that had not changed since before anyone in this clearing had been born. He had not known, until he had it, how much he had needed this. Chapter 16, The Commission Responds. The letters arrived where they were supposed to arrive on the day after his departure, which he knew because the monitoring system he had left active on the Commission's communication infrastructure registered a significant increase in traffic within 4 hours of the scheduled delivery time. He checked the monitoring system each morning as part of his daily review, the way he had always moved through his checklists, methodically and without drama, noting what had changed and what had not and updating his assessment of the situation accordingly. The Commission's response followed a pattern he had predicted in its broad strokes if not in all its specifics. The first 48 hours were characterized by the kind of institutional activity that suggested they were still deciding whether this was a containment problem or a retrieval problem, which was a meaningful distinction because the 2 problems had different solutions. The next 72 hours suggested they had reached a preliminary conclusion, because the communication pattern shifted from broad internal circulation to a more targeted exchange among a smaller group of people. The group of people they were now consulting was smaller and more senior than the group that had managed his file previously. This was, on balance, a development he had prepared for. He told Rumi and Yu what the monitoring system was showing at the end of the first week, because they had a right to know the state of the situation they had joined, and because he had promised everyone who came here that they would receive honest information about anything that affected them. He laid it out the same way he laid out everything, factually and completely, without editorializing in the direction of either alarm or reassurance. Rumi listened with her arms folded and her expression set to the one she wore when she was assessing a physical situation. Yu listened with the particular stillness she brought to information she had already partly anticipated. What do they actually have? Rumi said when he finished. In terms of finding us, the property is an illegal structure that requires 4 steps of document review to connect to any of our names. The warp gate access means there is no vehicular or foot traffic on any accessible route. The sensor perimeter I installed last spring covers the most likely approach vectors. He paused. They have my general knowledge of mountainous terrain in Nagano Prefecture and my documented use of the warp ability. That is a very large search space. How large? Said Yu. Nagano Prefecture is approximately 13,000 square kilometers. 4.3 hectares is not a large target within that. You absorbed this. She looked at the window. She looked back at him. What is the specific risk profile? She said. Not the abstract version. The practical one. He respected this question. It was the right question. The specific risk is that the Commission has resources I do not have complete visibility into, he said. There may be tracking methodologies I have not fully accounted for. The warp gate leaves a spatial residue that someone with the right detection ability could potentially follow, though I have been making gates in multiple locations to dilute that residue. And there is the possibility that someone who knows me personally could be approached for information. He met her gaze. That last one is the one I am most watchful about. Your classmates, Rumi said. Some of them have information about my quirk, or suspicions about it, or both. I do not believe any of them would deliberately provide information to the Commission. I believe some of them might do so inadvertently if approached without knowing what the approach was about. Yu was quiet for a moment. And Nedzu, she said. Nedzu has a channel to reach me if he needs to. He has not used it. I interpret that as him making a deliberate choice, which is consistent with what he told me in our last meeting. Another silence. Outside, the mountain was doing the ordinary things it did in the morning, which were mostly being large and making the sounds of birds and wind through the trees. So we watch and we wait, Rumi said. And we stay careful about the gate. Yes. She unfolded her arms. She looked at the table between them. I want to be useful, she said. Not just running in the mornings. If there is a security function here that needs a body, I want to be that body. He had expected this. It was consistent with everything he understood about her. The sensor perimeter covers the southern and eastern approaches well, he said. The northern approach, through the old logging road, is the one I am least satisfied with. If you want to run that route in the mornings and build a topographical familiarity with it, that would be genuinely useful. She nodded. That was the conversation decided. He looked at Yu, who had been listening to this exchange with the expression of someone reassessing a situation they thought they had already assessed. Are you all right? He said. She looked at him. Something moved across her face that was not quite discomfort and not quite resolve, something between the two. I knew this was the situation when I came, she said. I am not surprised. I am recalibrating. That is the correct response, he said. I know it is. The something resolved toward the second thing, toward resolve. Tell me what the kitchen needs in terms of supply for the next 3 weeks. If I am going to be here, I am going to feed people properly. He told her. She made a list. The list was, as he had expected, significant. He made the supply run through the warp gate to 3 different locations, spread across 2 prefectures, and came back with everything on the list and a few things he had added himself because he had been learning, over the past several months, what it meant to think about what other people needed rather than simply what was functionally necessary. You unpacked the supplies without being asked. His mother, who had been watching the whole exchange from the kitchen doorway with the particular attentiveness she brought to human dynamics, came forward and began helping, and by evening the kitchen was stocked in a way it had never been stocked before, and dinner was the best meal anyone in the farmhouse had eaten in a long time, and nobody talked about the commission at all. The Netsu channel activated on the 9th day. The message was brief and characteristically oblique: the tea was good this morning. A reference to nothing, which meant a reference to everything, which meant, I know where you are, approximately, and I have chosen not to say so, and I want you to know that I have chosen this. He sat with the message for a long time. Then he sent back, thank you for the recommendation. 2 words that also meant something. He did not show the message to anyone else. It was not anyone else's message. But he was aware of something settling in him when he set down the phone, something that had been held in a kind of suspension since the morning he had walked through the gate in his hallway, and that settled now into a steadier configuration. Netsu knew. Netsu had chosen not to act on knowing. That was, in its way, the most significant support he had received from any institutional source, and it had come in the form of a message about tea, which was exactly the kind of thing Netsu would do. He went back to what he had been doing, which was building a second shelf in the workshop for the tools that had accumulated over the summer, and he worked until the evening and had dinner at the outdoor table with everyone and went to sleep at a reasonable hour, and in the morning the mountain was still there and the spring was still running and the people in the farmhouse were still the people they were, having chosen this and remaining in the choice, and that was the whole of it. That was enough. Chapter 17, What People Do with Time. September came and brought the first suggestion of autumn color in the upper reaches of the treeline, a reddening at the edges that would take another month to descend fully to the clearing but that announced itself early in the mornings when the light had a particular quality and the air had a particular weight. He had been thinking about what the days needed to be, structurally, and had reached the conclusion that the answer was nothing. There did not need to be a structure imposed from above. The people here were adults who had spent years in highly structured environments, and what they needed from this place was not another structure but the space to find their own. What he could offer was the maintenance of the material conditions, the water and the food and the heat and the roof, and the guarantee that nobody would be asked to perform anything they had not chosen. What happened instead, which he had not predicted with any precision though he had hoped for it in general terms, was that people found their own shapes within the available space, and the shapes were different from each other and compatible in ways that made the whole more workable than the sum of its parts. Rumi ran. This was the central organizing fact of her days here. She ran in the mountain forest at dawn and sometimes again in the late afternoon, and the routes she ran became longer and more complex as September went on, extending further into the surrounding terrain, becoming an intimate knowledge of the mountain that was not patrol but was not entirely different from it either. She was learning the place, in the way she learned everything, which was through her body and through direct contact and through the specific kind of attention that came from moving through a thing rather than observing it at a distance. When she was not running she was working. She had taken on the structural maintenance of the property as what he understood was effectively her contribution to the household, not because she had been asked but because it needed doing and because she was the person best suited to it. She replaced a section of the external wall cladding on the south face of the farmhouse that had been showing early signs of moisture damage. She rebuilt the drainage channel from the spring, which had been working but not well, and rebuilt it correctly so that it worked well. She spent 3 days in late September doing a full assessment of the larger outbuilding's structural soundness and producing a report that was more thorough than anything a professional contractor would have written. Because professional contractors were not people for whom the structural soundness of a place had personal stakes. She brought him the report one morning at the outdoor table. He read it while she sat across from him and drank her post-run tea with the patient composure of someone who had already finished thinking about the thing they had brought. The east wall of the workshop needs attention before deep winter, he said, reading. The east wall of the workshop needs attention before deep winter, she confirmed. I have marked the specific locations. The materials are straightforward. How long will it take? 2 days with 2 people. 4 days alone. I will clear 2 days. She nodded. She refilled her tea. She looked at the treeline. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. This. What I am doing here. You understand that I am not sure yet what shape it takes. What the long version of this is. She did not look at him while she said this. She looked at the mountain, which was the direction she looked when she was saying something that required care. I know what I left. I do not yet fully know what I came to. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about what was honest rather than what was reassuring. I think that is exactly the right place to be, at 2 months in, he said. You spent 4 years in a context that told you very specifically what you were for. The answer to what you are for now is not going to come quickly, and I would be suspicious if it did, because quick answers to that question are usually answers you have borrowed from somewhere else. He looked at her. What I know is that the work you are doing here is real work and it matters, and the fact that it does not come with a title or a ranking does not change that. She was quiet for a while. The running helps, she said finally. I did not think it would help differently here than it did there. But it does. It is different when you are not running towards something that needs you. He filed that sentence carefully. It is different, he agreed, when you are running because you want to. She looked at him with the direct expression that was her version of acknowledgement. Then she picked up her tea and looked at the tree-line again, and the conversation was done in the way that conversations with her were done, which was completely rather than gradually. Yu's relationship with the kitchen had become, by September, the central fact of everyone's day in a way that nobody had entirely anticipated and nobody wanted to change. She cooked 3 meals, not always, but often enough that it had become the pattern. And the meals were not simple fuel but were things she had thought about, that had flavors and textures and a particular quality of food that someone made when they were taking pleasure in the making. She had asked everyone what they disliked and what they preferred, in the methodical way she did things, and had produced a mental model of the household's tastes that she updated regularly and consulted without apparent effort. She also, he came to understand, cooked when she was thinking. The kitchen was where she processed things. And he learned to read the correlation between the complexity of what appeared at the table and the complexity of whatever she had been working through during the hours she had spent producing it. Simple days produced simple food, good but unelaborate. The days when she had been thinking hard about something produced food that was interesting in ways he could not entirely account for, structured around combinations that would not have been obvious. He said this to her one evening, after a dinner that had been, by any reasonable assessment, remarkable. You noticed, she said. It was not quite a question. You are the most readable person in this house when you cook, he said. Everything else you do, you maintain about 4 layers of information management. In the kitchen you apparently forget to. She looked at him with the layered expression. That is either an observation or a criticism, she said. It is an observation. I have no criticism. She was quiet for a moment. Today I was thinking about my mother, she said. She cooked. Not well, but with the same intention. I was thinking about what she would make of this. What do you think she would make of it? You considered. She looked at the kitchen, the familiar territory of it. I think she would be confused by the location, she said. She was a city person. She would not understand the mountain. A pause. But she would understand the table. She would understand everyone sitting down together. Then she would approve of the most important part, he said. You looked at him. The layered expression had shifted into something simpler and more direct. You are strange, she said. In a way that is not unpleasant. I have been told this by reliable sources, he said. She made the sound that was not quite a laugh, which he had come to think of as one of the things she did when she had been caught enjoying something she had not expected to enjoy, and turned back to the washing up. His mother extended her stay beyond the first month without discussing it with him first, which was the same approach she used for most of her important decisions and which he had inherited. She told him on a Tuesday morning in late September, not as a question but as a statement, that she had arranged her situation in Muzidafu, which she did not elaborate on, and that she was going to stay through the winter at minimum. She said this in the same tone she used for grocery lists and structural assessments. And he said nothing for a moment and then said he was very glad, which was the truest thing he knew how to say and which she received with a nod that contained everything she was not saying about how glad she was also. What his mother did in the household was different from what Rumi and you did, and different again from what he did, and the difference was something he watched with the particular attention he brought to things he had not fully anticipated. She was the connective tissue. She was the person who moved between the others with the ease of someone who had no agenda to protect, who asked questions out of genuine curiosity and who listened to the answers with full attention, who noticed when someone had a difficult day and responded to it not with direct inquiry but with the kind of tangential care that said I see you without requiring anything back. She taught you how to make the specific kind of miso his mother's family had been making for 3 generations, which involved a process he had eaten the results of his entire life without ever learning, and the afternoon they spent doing this in the kitchen was one of the best afternoons the farmhouse had contained so far, measured by the sounds that came out of it. He had been in the workshop and he had heard them, his mother's voice explaining something, use concentrated replies, and then both of them laughing at something he had not been present for and would not ask about because it belonged to them. He had put down the tool he was holding and just listened for a moment. Then he picked it up again and kept working, because the work needed doing, but the sound stayed with him. Chapter 18, The Question of Ryuko. He had not heard from Ryuko in 6 weeks. The last message through the secure channel had been in early August, a brief operational update telling him that her team placement was proceeding and that she expected to have everything resolved by November. Since then, nothing. He did not reach out, because he had told her there was no pressure and he had meant it, and reaching out now would contradict that, and he did not contradict the things he said unless he had a reason that outweighed the cost. But he thought about the silence. He turned it over in the way he turned over information he did not yet understand, not anxiously but carefully, the way you handle something fragile that you are trying to assess without applying pressure that would damage it. The silence could mean several things. It could mean she was fine and occupied and the 6 months she had said were running as planned. It could mean she was fine and had decided against coming, and the silence was her way of arriving at that decision in her own time before telling him. It could mean something had happened, something the commission had done or something in her own situation, that had changed the terms of the choice she had been considering. He ran the probabilities and sat with the uncertainty and did neither more nor less than what the situation required, which was to wait. The message came on a Tuesday in October, in the morning, when the first real autumn rain had been falling on the mountain since the previous evening and the clearing smelled of wet earth and the cold had a serious quality it had not had in September. The message said, I need more time. The team situation is more complex than I anticipated. I am not pulling back from what I said. I am asking for patience. He read it. He sat with it for the length of time it took to understand what it contained, which was more than the words. He wrote back, you have as much time as you need. This place will be here. So will we. He sent it and put down the phone and went to help Rumi with the east wall repair, which they had been deferring because of the rain and which could not be deferred much longer. They worked in the cold and the wet, him holding materials while she made the repairs with the focused precision of someone who found the physical demands of outdoor work in difficult conditions uncomplaining and natural, and at some point mid-morning, when they were both thoroughly damp and the work was proceeding well, she said without looking up from what she was doing, she wrote back. He looked at her. I saw your face this morning, she said. The face you make when the monitoring system tells you something you do not like. And then later your face when you were reading your phone. Different faces. You read faces. I have always read faces. Heroes learn to read faces. She handed him a piece of wall material to hold steady. She is asking for more time. Yes. And you told her she has it. Yes. Rumi worked in silence for a minute. The rain came down on the mountain with the patient persistence of autumn rain. She will come, Rumi said. How do you know? He said. Because she told you she would and because she is the kind of person who means what she says. She looked at him briefly, directly. You know this. You are just waiting for confirmation because confirmation is your natural language. He thought about this. That is accurate, he said. I know it is. She turned back to the wall. Now hold that piece steady, you let it slip. He held it steady. The rain continued. The repair went well, better than he had expected, and by early afternoon the east wall of the workshop was sound, and they went inside and his mother gave them both hot soup without being asked because she had been watching through the kitchen window and had timed it perfectly, and the 4 of them sat around the table and ate in the particular comfortable silence of people who have done something together and do not need to talk about it. October deepened. The autumn came down fully from the upper mountain, the color spreading through the tree line in the way that felt both gradual and sudden, and the clearing caught the falling leaves from the surrounding trees in a way that made the whole property briefly golden in the afternoons when the low sun came through at the right angle. He found you standing in the clearing one of those afternoons, not doing anything, just standing with her hands in her pockets looking at the trees. He went out with 2 cups of tea and gave her one and stood beside her and also looked at the trees. They stood there for a while. I have been thinking, she said. About what I want to do with the next part. She held the cup in both hands. Not the years. Just the next part. What I want to be doing in the spring. What have you arrived at? She was quiet for a moment. There is a village about 12 kilometers north, she said. I walked there last week. There are people there who are aging, who have limited access to medical resources, who have ordinary needs that require a person who can get things and do things and show up. She paused. I want to do that. Not as a hero. Not as anyone with a quirk or a costume or a public function. Just as someone who drives to the medical supply depot when the elderly pharmacist cannot, or who helps clear the road when the autumn blockages come, or who is simply a reliable presence. He looked at her. She turned to look back at him, and her expression was the plainest he had ever seen it, stripped of all the management, simply a person saying a true thing. I was good at being visible, she said. I want to find out if I am good at being useful. Quietly useful, in the way that nobody photographs. That is an excellent plan, he said. I can provide the logistics. A vehicle that is not connected to any of our names. A cover identity for regular contact with the village if you want one. The routes are navigable year-round by ATV and by road. She looked at him steadily. You are very ready with the logistics, she said. I have been thinking about what the surrounding communities might need and how this place might develop a quiet relationship with them for approximately 3 months, he admitted. Your version is better than anything I had specifically imagined. She was quiet for a moment. Then she did the thing he had catalogued only a few times before, the thing where the last layer of management came down entirely and what was underneath was simply her, present and direct and undecorated. Thank you for this place, she said. I did not know what I was looking for when I came. But I think this is it. He did not know the right response to that. He tried honesty, which was usually the right response. Thank you for trusting it enough to come, he said. And for the kitchen. The kitchen has significantly improved everyone's quality of life. She made the sound that was not quite a laugh, and it lasted a little longer than it usually did, and when she turned back toward the house he noticed that she was smiling in the way that people smile when they are smiling at something inside rather than at something external. He looked at the golden trees. He drank his tea. The afternoon light on the mountain was the kind of light that made everything look exactly like what it was, nothing more and nothing less, just the true colors of things in good light. He was, he thought, beginning to understand what it meant to live in a place rather than to maintain one. Chapter 19, The Visit. The commission arrived on a Friday morning in November. He knew they were coming approximately 40 minutes before they arrived, which was enough time. The sensor on the northern approach registered the first contact, a vehicle moving up the old logging road at low speed, which was the approach vector he had identified as the least well covered and which Rumi had been running every morning for 2 months. The vehicle moved carefully, which told him it was not an emergency deployment. It was an administrative visit, which was either better or worse than an emergency deployment depending on factors he did not yet have. He sent a message to Rumi, who was already on the morning run, with a single word, Northern. She would understand. He told his mother and you what was happening, concisely and without alarm, because there was no point in alarm and because they deserved to know. His mother went to the kitchen and began making tea, which was what she did when she needed to be doing something with her hands. You looked at him with the expression she wore when she was updating her assessment of a situation. What do you need from me, she said. Stay inside unless I ask for something. This is my conversation to have. He paused. But I am glad you are here. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and went to the kitchen with his mother. He went outside and stood in the clearing and waited. There were 2 of them. He had expected more and was revising his assessment of the situation upward, because two people on an administrative visit to a location they had worked for 3 months to find suggested a specific kind of institutional confidence, the kind that came from having made a decision to try persuasion before escalation. He recognized one of them. The representative named Ishida, who had conducted the second meeting at the Commission's satellite office. She was dressed appropriately for the mountain in November, which told him this visit had been planned carefully enough to account for practical realities. The second person was a man he did not recognize, younger, in the specific professional configuration of someone who assessed situations for someone else. They came into the clearing and stopped at the appropriate distance. Ishida looked at the farmhouse, at the cleared space, at the garden area you had been developing along the eastern edge, at the workshop with its freshly repaired wall. Her expression was the one he had seen in the Commission's satellite office, professionally neutral and very attentive. Midoriya-san, she said. Ishida-san, he said. You found it. It took longer than we expected, she said. There was something in her tone that was not quite rueful but in that direction. I worked hard to make it difficult, he said. Please sit down. There is tea. She looked at him for a moment. Whatever she had expected to find here, he could see her revising it. The man beside her was making no revision, which told him the man's function was observation rather than assessment. She sat down at the outdoor table. He poured the tea that his mother had sent out, which was good tea in good cups, because his mother understood that the material quality of a thing communicated something about the people producing it. Ishida wrapped her hands around the cup. She looked at him directly. I want to be straightforward with you, she said. I would prefer that to the alternative, he said. She looked at him with something that might have been, very briefly, appreciation. The Commission has a significant institutional interest in your ability. You understand this. I am not going to pretend otherwise or reframe it as something other than what it is. She set down the cup. What I am here to tell you is that the Commission is prepared to offer substantially different terms than anything previously discussed. Not a managed placement. A genuine consultation structure, with clearly defined limits on what can and cannot be asked of you, with legal protections for the limits, and with a financial arrangement that would allow you to maintain this property and your current situation without interference. He listened to all of this. In exchange for what, he said. Availability, she said. 2 to 4 times per year. Specific scenarios, defined in advance, with right of refusal. Defined by whom? Jointly. He looked at his tea. He thought about Rumi somewhere in the trees on the northern approach, about his mother and you in the kitchen behind him, about the east wall of the workshop and the root cellar and the spring-fed water and all the months of work. He thought about what joint meant in the context of an institution with the Commission's resources and history. Can I ask you a direct question, he said. Yes. What is the specific nature of the scenarios you have in mind? She was quiet for a moment. The quality of the quiet told him she had expected this question and had been deciding how to answer it. There are individuals with particularly dangerous or destabilizing abilities who have been identified as significant threats to public safety, she said. The Commission's current methods of managing these individuals involve incarceration, which is imperfect. Your ability offers an alternative that is, in theory, more humane and more durable. He was very still. He understood what she was describing. He had understood it from the moment she said availability. He had understood it, in fact, from the moment the first Commission representative had invited him pleasantly into a program for students with unusual quirks. He had always understood what they wanted him for. He had simply needed to hear it said clearly. You want me to disarm people, he said. In specific cases. With oversight. People who have been identified by the Commission as threatening. By an independent panel. Convened by the Commission, he said. Reporting to the Commission. With criteria established by the Commission. She did not answer this. She did not need to. He picked up his cup. He drank the last of his tea. He set the cup down carefully. No, he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted from professionally neutral towards something that had more texture. You understand what refusing means, she said. In terms of your situation here,